Planning meeting. It is now just past 6 o'clock. I think it's 6:02, and I'd like to start the meeting. My name is Councillor Mike Fletcher, and I will be chairing the meeting tonight. I'd like to remind everybody that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded for publication on the Council's website. And there are no planned fire alarms this evening. So in the case of an emergency, please evacuate the building using the nearest available exit. I think we're down to that one. And congregate at the assembly point outside the college, which is just opposite us here. So, item 1 on the agenda, apologies for absence. We've received an apology from Councillor Jones. Carly, anything else? No, nobody else is here. Item 2, minutes. I move that the minutes of the Planning Committee meeting held on the 11th of November be approved as a correct record. Are there any comments on the accuracy of the minutes? Yes, Russell.
Thank you, Chair. Just in relation to the properties that are going to be built at South Ockenden, my ward, where I asked a question about heat pumps, and the only evidence they had was ground source heat pumps being used in Thurrock so far, which is not mentioned in the minutes. And the explanation regards the use of heat pumps, that the residents may find it difficult at first to understand them. Was saying that the heating levels was getting used to the heating levels and not instant hot to cold. This is a thing that concerns me about the heat pumps, as I was trying to elucidate, and that the residents won't be able to come in and just switch it on to make it cold to hot, because heat pumps need to be switched on for a period of time, a long period of time, for them to work, as I understand. So I was like, when those properties are considered to be built, that a gas supply is also included in case these heat pumps don't work. And as a council, I wouldn't like to receive complaints from the residents that their homes are not adequately heated, and then being council property homes also. Thank you.
Thanks, Russell. Obviously, what we can do, I'm not sure we can add any recommendations, but we can certainly make sure that the minutes are amended to note to the fact that you asked about heat pumps, and specifically that you asked about the difference in how the cold to hot works. Is that basically a reasonable summary of what you're after including?
Yes, the fact that you can't just come in, switch them on, hot to cold. A heat pump needs to be on for quite some considerable time to work, and it may not be fair to the residents in those new homes.
Thanks, Russell. So, Carly, if you wouldn't mind adding that to the minutes. Apart from that, are we happy to approve the minutes as an accurate record? Great. Thank you very much. Item 3 on the agenda, items of urgent business. I have not agreed to any items of urgent business tonight. Item 4, declarations of interest. Does anybody have any declarations of interest to make? Steve and then Tom.
Thanks, Chair. The Bellis Park one, I'm on the board, so I will remove myself from discussions on that one.
Thanks, Steve. And Tom?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. As an employee of DP World London Gateway, I'll remove myself from item 11. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, item 5 on the agenda, declarations of receipts. Does anybody want to declare any correspondence, etc.? Okay, we'll take Aaron and then Jackie, and we'll see who else wants to add in after that.
Thank you, Chair. We probably all received it in the post. I have handed it over to Ashley, a copy regarding item 7, I think it is. All the one in Baker Street from the developer, so just want to add that.
Yeah, I think we've all received that. I wouldn't take it personally. Okay, so that's one item. Steve, you were exactly. Same thing. Okay, Jackie.
Same thing, Chair.
Right, so we've almost all had that. Okay. Yeah. key point being that we will base our decision tonight on what we hear from the officer, from the applicant, and from the people in opposition, rather than anything that we've received in the post beforehand. I think we're all agreed on that, yeah? Excellent.
I think we were emailed some comments from someone opposing the All-Sit development.
Yes, we were.
Yeah, Cardi sent them to everyone, so yeah.
Again,
Yeah.
it's worth being aware of these. However, I remind you that we need to make our decision on what we hear tonight, and the discussion and the questions, the answers to those questions tonight. Okay? Item 6 on the agenda, planning appeals. Jonathan, could you talk us through the latest?
Thank you, Chair. So the latest appeal performance is on page 16. So 3 appeals received and only 1 allowed, so 33% allowed rate. And we produced a short report, as members requested at the last meeting, in regards to performance over the last 2 quarters. This report's on pages 17 to 21, and that shows that there's excuse me, no significant trend in terms of the appeals that have been allowed. So officers don't feel that there's any concern that should be raised with regards to the allowed appeals. And it shows a very positive trend, certainly in terms of the appeals being dismissed in relation to poor quality design.
Thanks, Jonathan. Any questions for Jonathan on the appeals update? Srikanth.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity. Thank you, Officer, for the report. I'm having page number 16, appeal performance. We have got the table. In the table, like total number of appeals have given in that one. Also, second column, is it that number of allowed or not allowed? The second one.
In the May column,
A second column.
so,
The
So
total
it's
number
basically,
of appeals.
yeah, so it's total number of appeals,
Appeals.
then the number allowed, and finally the
Yeah, is
allowed
it-
as a percentage of the whole.
So just I want to know, like, we can see that no allowed. Is it like number of allotted one numbers or not allowed?
oh, number, sorry, it means number allowed, yes. We could change that for next time if you like, yes. Yeah,
Thank you, Officer.
yeah. Yeah.
Any other questions? Thanks, Srikanth. Any other questions? Okay, so we will move on to item number 7 on the agenda. This is reference land adjacent to Chapel Farm and to the rear of High Road and Baker Street, Orsett. Before I mention this, we have 2 statements which we will be hearing. Statement of opposition from Richard Hughes on behalf of the residents group. We'll also be hearing a statement of support from a gentleman by the name of Ray Houghton for the applicant. We've had a couple of items basically that appear to have got lost in the machinery administratively, so we have 1 or 2 extra statements than you have on your pre-printed list. But I'll flag that up whenever it occurs. So before we get to that, it's David Stewart who'll be presenting. Over to you, David.
Thank you, Chair. Before I actually start with the presentation, there are just a couple of updates to the report that I'd like to inform you of. The first matter relates to the number of representations now received. We have now received 114 representations. The increase in number from when the report was drafted, all of those additional responses are in support of the proposal. The second point I'd like to raise is that the Natural England objection that I reported has now been lifted. So Natural England do not now object to this proposal. Right, thank you. I think just a very brief description of the application site, and so referring to the plan on the screen, it embraces land which is to the south of properties fronting High Road and to the east of houses fronting Baker Street. The southern extent of the development boundary is defined by footpath number 96, which actually is beyond the site boundary, but nevertheless running alongside it across the screen from west to east. Access to the development is proposed off Baker Street, and it's created by the demolition of a residential property which is immediately to the south of Jay's Lodge Caravan Park. And as there is a separate pedestrian access and cycle access from the high road at the northern end of the site, which is that tongue of land where my cursor currently is. I think the only other thing I'd like to say about the site itself is that the eastern boundary is defined by the tree belt, which is located immediately to the east of that boundary and where my cursor is. The scheme itself comprises the development of 150 dwellings. There are various sizes ranging from 1 to 4 beds, and they're in a mix of terraces, semi-detached and detached houses and bungalows. 50% of the dwellings are affordable, and the layout shows the spread of affordable across the site, which if I flick to the next slide is shown in that layout plan. Those coloured red are affordable rented. Those coloured blue are affordable shared ownership. And there are 4 that are coloured purple, where my cursor is at the moment and where it's moving to now, that are first-time buyers' properties. The homes will be built to current building regulations, adaptable standards, and 3% of all of them are built with full wheelchair access, thus catering for a range of needs. The layout of the site, and I'll stick on this slide for the moment, really is driven in part by the need to preserve archaeological evidence, predominantly in the northwest corner of the site, where all the open space is located, and where an area designated as an equipped play area is situated. There is another area of informal play on the south side of the site, again where my cursor is. That's not equipped in any way. The remainder of the green areas are a mix of formal landscape for biodiversity enhancement and also water attenuation measures. The section of site immediately to the south of the main access road off Baker Street actually, although it doesn't show water, has an extensive swale area to collect water runoff in times of excess. The scheme is a full planning application, so we have a range of design and materials, the details of which are provided in your report. They are generally acceptable and indeed they're of a good quality of design, but I won't go into further detail in that aspect, just simply to report that the scheme in officers' views meets the requirements of policies CSTP 22, 23 and PMD2 of the adopted core strategy. In examining the issues associated with the development, I think I need to start with regard to the issue of the provision of housing. The Thurrock Core Strategy Plan period expires next year, and the borough cannot provide housing land to meet its objectively assessed housing need. This currently stands at around 1,100 dwellings per annum. In addition to not being able to supply land for future needs, the past housing delivery in the area has failed to deliver more than 50% of the need over previous years. This has a significance in the way in which we are required to look at this application. Paragraph 79C of the MPPF states that where delivery has met less than 75% of housing needs over the past 3 years, the presumption in favour of the development applies. So that is the starting point on which to consider this application. There are two other major matters, as well as other issues, but I'll concentrate on those that I consider to be of significance. The first relates to the sustainability of the site, and the second relates to the impact of development on the green belt. With regards to sustainability, the report sets out the major findings. The development does meet economic, social, and environmental benefits. It's fair to say that it does take up fresh land for development, and that is contrary to the aim of adopted Thurrock Core Strategy policy, which concentrates on the use of previously developed sites. I can only give limited weight to this in view of the urgent need for Thurrock to use fresh land to supply both its backlog and its future housing needs. Additionally, paragraph 110 of the MPPF gives consideration to the factors affecting the sustainability of the location, and the report sets out why officers conclude the development meets these aims. Turning now to green belt matters, the MPPF is fairly prescriptive. It firstly seeks to protect the openness of the green belt, and at paragraph 154 sets out those developments that are appropriate in the green belt. Housing is not one of those exceptions. However, paragraph 155 sets out other circumstances where development is not considered inappropriate. Paragraph 155A relates to the use of grey belt land, and no doubt members have heard a lot about grey belt land. My report sets out my assessment of this site, and officers have taken the clear guidance set out in both defining grey belt land, which is contained in the glossary to the MPPF, and also the further guidance in the planning policy guidance on what constitutes strong, moderate, or weak contribution to the three purposes of green belt designation under consideration in paragraph 155, namely the preventing of urban sprawl, merging of towns, and protecting the setting of historic towns. This site does not serve a strong purpose to any of those objectives, and therefore complies with the definition of grey belt land, where development is not inappropriate, provided it meets the golden rules. In this case, the development does meet those golden rules. The scheme provides 50% affordable housing. It does provide necessary improvements to local infrastructure and makes provision for new green spaces in accordance with paragraph 159 of the MPPF. And it advises that development which complies with the golden rule should be given significant weight in favour of the granting of planning permission. As regards other matters, officers conclude the development doesn't adversely impact on the landscape character of the area. The scheme is sympathetic to the character of the locality. It doesn't give rise to undue harms to the amenity of existing residents, and there are no adverse transport impacts that have not been mitigated. And in this respect, there are some details provided, not only of the junction into the site off Baker Street, but also other improvements, crossing points on High Road, and further speed restrictors, speed cushions located in Baker Street on either side of the access, as well as a further crossing point further down Baker Street to the south. Ecological concerns have been addressed, and the development provides satisfactory biodiversity net gain enhancements. There are no adverse impacts arising from the impact of flooding or surface water runoff, and the development will meet climate change requirements. One potential issue that members may be concerned about relates to education, and my report is clear on the matter of potential contributions. The applicant has also submitted their own response to the education objection lodged against this scheme, and they too suggest that education contributions are not totally necessary. In fact, that's my conclusion. The applicants have indicated that they are prepared to meet any reasonable and justified contribution on educational matters, and I should point that out to members. There is no need for additional childcare places given the recent expansion at Alsett Heath Academy. Pardon me. And there is no need for additional primary school places for those schools within a 2-mile radius of the site which have adequate spare capacity. Officers conclude that there are no material considerations that outweigh the presumption in favour of the development, and I therefore recommend the scheme for approval, subject to the completion of a suitable legal agreement relating to planning obligations and the conditions set out in this report. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Obviously, you'll get the opportunity to question David, but first we will have the statements. So the first statement is a statement of objection from Richard Hughes. Richard, are you with us? If you'd like to come down to, I think it's the corner one that yeah, that's it. Just to let you know, Richard, we'll give you 3 minutes. I don't know if we've got the counter today. Some days we do, some days we don't.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
But we won't be too... Basically, if you aim for 3 minutes, we'll be grateful. On you go. I don't make the rules, I only apply them. I'm sorry, if you wish to take part in the conversation, I'm afraid we will have to ask you not to. We've got a job to do tonight. We will show the due respect to both applicants and those who are objecting, and the way we do it is to do it via spokespeople. On you go, Richard.
Thank you, Chair. A residential scheme of this scale is unsustainable in this location. Not my words. Those are the words of the Council's own Urban Design Department. Unsustainable. The exact term also used by both your Education and your Healthcare departments. Without a tick for sustainability, the justification for reclassifying this much valued green space as grey belt falls down. So let's talk about sustainability. The report alleges that Alsett benefits from everything needed for day-to-day living. Untrue. There's a single convenience store, which the report concedes is more than a reasonable walk away from the site, and a car is required to do the big shop. There's an oversubscribed GP and an oversubscribed primary school. The developer solution Send the 45 additional primary kids to schools around the area, again requiring a car as buses provide at best an hourly service. And the road closures and chaos brought by the construction of the Lower Thames crossing will be huge and only exacerbate existing unsustainability, as highlighted by your Highways Department. By the officer's own admission, the plan is not in accordance with adopted growth strategy, contrary to multiple policies, and does not meet the environmental objections of the NPPF. The concerns of your own departments have not been given appropriate weight. Instead, the officers cover themselves in paragraph 1517 by claiming that even if the site is not to be considered grey belt, as it certainly shouldn't, then very special circumstances apply. However, Section 15 is entirely lacking in detail to justify this. Unmet housing need on its own does not amount to very special circumstances. Those are a very high bar and not one to be snuck under. Members should also focus on the thin and dismissive consideration that paragraph 13.8.8 gives to the many heritage assets close to this site. Only a desk-based assessment was completed. NPPF 207 requires applicants to assess significance properly. Now, there are four main aspects to significance, including historic interest. It's bold to declare that there is no harm at all to the ancient monument 80 metres away, listed buildings, or the conservation area when the potential historic interest has not been discussed. It's wrong to say that NPPF 215 simply isn't engaged. Without consideration of historic interest, the report is inadequate and seriously flawed. This shows a lack of concern for Alseth's history, and the plan does very little to boost public services and infrastructure, offering nothing for Alseth's future, save for a couple of climbing frames and an insignificant cycle path. The developer's only concern is for the present. So, since we're only concerning ourselves with the present, let me tell you that now is not the right time for this development. Not now. At least wait until the council has an up-to-date local plan. Better still, wait until the dust has quite literally settled on the construction of the Lower Thames crossing that will pass less than 400 metres away, and its impact can fully be assessed. It's okay to tell your planning officers, you know what, you got this one wrong. After all, that's exactly what they have told so many of your own departments. Passing this opportunistic development would set a precedent that sees our aspirational village sprawl into a town. I urge you to consider fully our solicitor's report and vote to reject this plan.
Thanks, Richard. Very well put. What we're going to do now is we're just going to open it up to the members to see if they've got any factual questions for you before we let you go, if that's okay. Councillors? Okay, I think that's a good thing usually. Sorry, Srikanth, you have a question.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, David, for reading your statement and objection. Like Thurrock, locally and nationally, houses are needed. So do you have any location space where can able to build? Like now planning, developers they want to bring the planning from here where your objection. So do you recommend any other places where?
Sorry, Srikanth.
With due respect, it's not my job to recommend places for the council to build.
Yeah, Srikanth, I'm afraid that's certainly beyond Mr. Hughes's capacity to answer. We are only looking at this particular location for this question. Okay.
Okay.
Steve. Oh, Richard, if you wouldn't mind turning off your microphone, apparently it...
Thanks, Chair. Just a question. How many houses are there in what I would call the hamlet of Baker Street? Do you know roughly?
There are 50 houses that border the site and an additional 50 on the opposite sides of the road on both, so cumulatively 50 in Baker Street and High Road.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Steve. Anybody else got any questions for Richard? Okay, thank you very much, and you can go back to your seat. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Chair.
Right, we now have a statement of support from Ray Houghton on behalf of the applicant. Ray, are you here? So same thing, Ray. You'll have 3 minutes to read your statement, and then we'll ask the councillors if they have any questions, factual questions for you, in your own time.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. My name is Ray Houghton. I'm the Head of Planning at Barrett David Wilson, Eastern Counties. We are a house builder, not a land promoter, and this is a full application. We would wish to start works as soon as the requisite consents were to be granted. We employ locally sourced labour, including through our highly successful apprenticeship schemes. We want to do something special, something fundamental in Thurrock that hasn't happened for a generation. Build truly affordable housing in Orsett. Whether it is the dream of home ownership or simply wanting an affordable roof over their head, many residents in Thurrock find themselves locked out of Orsett. We're proposing 50% affordable housing with a tenure mix that Thurrock's Housing Department have asked for. We've also listened to Councillor Lee Watson in lowering the affordable rents to 70% of market rate instead of the standard 80%. That means that a 2-bedroom semi will be £420 a month cheaper than the market rate. That puts these homes in the reach of more of your residents. We believe that we're the first major house builder to come before you with this offer. Thurrock would retain the nomination rights for every affordable home, ensuring that we build local homes for local people. All homes will be built tenure blind to the same high specification as the market dwellings. Tonight, you can set this new standard for the rest to follow. The benefits do not just simply stop at affordable housing. Our partnership with the RSPB means that from native tree planting to Swift bricks, we will be creating new homes for nature as well. We will deliver a minimum biodiversity net gain of at least 10% compared to the site's existing use. Our landscape-led approach also means that 40% of the site will be retained as open space. We worked hard with officers to get the detail right, and we thank them for their very professional input. All technical matters have been addressed, and there are no statutory objections. The scheme will make the best use of a sustainable site. We've also engaged with local residents, 32 of whom support the application. Residents told us the area urgently needs more housing for young families and first-time buyers. Among those is Dawn, who also lives in Orsett, and she said that development would be good for the area. Everyone should have a fair opportunity to own their own home. Another said, so many people are struggling with housing and poor mental health. The new homes could help people get back on their feet. You, as councillors, have the opportunity to help local people who want to live in a home they can afford in an attractive location. I hope you will take the opportunity to vote to approve as per your officer recommendation. Many thanks.
Thanks, Ray. Councillors, anybody got any questions for Ray, any of a factual nature? Kathy.
Thank you. It's encouraging to hear the low affordable rent. Can you just make it clear? You said 70% of market rate, but on the report it said it should be kept at local housing allowance levels. Is that the case?
So the 70% is as per the market, open market rent value. Typically at the moment, for the property I described would be £980 as opposed to near £1,450.
Okay, thank you. So is that where it says it should be kept at local housing allowance levels, is that incorrect? This is in the report, page 39.1.
I think we're probably talking about the same thing, actually, to be fair.
Suggest, Kathy, we bring that one up with David when...
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah? Okay, any further questions for Ray? Russell.
Good evening. Just so I fully understand the rented houses aspect of this report, who will be the landlord that'll be renting these properties?
So we work with a number of registered providers, and it would be they who ultimately manage that process. They are all registered providers, registered with the council, so they are recognised as ones that have already delivered in the area. We don't know who they might be yet, but we've gone out to quite a few to express interest.
So I fully understand, you'll be selling these properties to these associations for them to rent out?
Effectively, yes.
Thanks, Russell. Any further questions? Okay. Thanks, Ray. If you'd like to retake your seat. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
So we will now go back to David's original presentation, and I'll ask you if you have any questions for David on what's been presented in outlining this application. So who would like to start? Steve.
Thanks, Chair. I'm looking at the map, and the gardens in Baker Street and is it High Road? They look quite long, David. What we don't need is sort of houses that sort of almost back onto each other. What's your view in terms of the sort of the closeness of the new properties as against the existing ones?
The rear garden areas of the new housing are inevitably smaller than some of the traditional rear garden lengths that you've got both on High Road and Baker Street. Those by far exceed current housing requirements. What we have is a scheme that provides us with satisfactory private amenity space. It is a scheme which has satisfactory back-to-back distances, so rear elevation to rear elevation, exceeding 21 metres, which is our requirement. So I am perfectly satisfied with the size of those gardens and the relationship of the dwellings with each other and with the properties, the existing properties that some of them back onto.
And is there any screening between the properties?
There is some existing screening, but part of the proposal also provides for close boarded fencing throughout the scheme. Some of the more prominent plots where a rear garden may be on a corner, there is a more substantial boundary treatment. That's normally a wall, and several are shown on this scheme. So yes, there is very good separation to prevent any overlooking or loss of privacy.
And I notice that there's play areas in between the existing houses and the new houses as well, so that would be a further open.
That's correct. The equipped play area is located in the northwestern part of the site. I won't say backing on to properties on the high road. There is some separation distance between the equipped play area and the rear gardens of those properties, but nevertheless, if there were children living in high road properties, they could also make use of that scheme.
Thanks, Steve. Who's next? Steve.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, David, for your report. A couple of observations. One, your terminology throughout the document and this evening suggests it's happened. So you're talking very much in the past tense, which I found somewhat odd. That was my first one. The second question is, you've just used the term satisfactory, and is that really what we aspire to, as something that's satisfactory? Just a question. Thank you.
2, have I predetermined the application? No. All the considerations are made against current planning policy, and the weight I give to each of the items is obviously my opinion on the weight that should be given. Others may have slightly different views or significantly different views, depending on your outlook. But I am the planning officer who has been required to assess the scheme, and I've sought to do so against adopted policy. In terms of the use of the term satisfactory, satisfactory in my terms is it meets current policy requirements. Yeah, of course, some properties on new estates, I'd love larger gardens, or love to see some larger gardens. Are they inadequate? Absolutely not. They are satisfactory and adequate to meet all requirements that currently are placed on the developer by adopted policy.
Thank you, David.
Thanks, Steve. Kathy?
Yeah, thanks for the report. What I'd like to ask about is we seem to have jumped from defining green belt and redefining it as grey belt without any much discussion along the way. Where the place I'm thinking of before was in Averley, and it was pretty much enclosed. It was a triangular site on Park Lane that people may remember. This one isn't, to me, enclosed. It's still got open farmland to the east and to the south, and I'm not sure. I'm personally not convinced that would meet grey belt criteria, because it's not contained by any reasonable boundaries.
The PPG does give some further assistance in terms of seeking to define what is meant. In some cases, you would define infrastructure such as railways or roadways as boundary features and features that would contain development. I suppose in my terms, sorry, I shouldn't say in my terms at all, the eastern boundary has significant treed vegetation, and that is sufficient to contain development to this site. I suppose the more open boundary is probably the southern one, where there's a public right-of-way, which isn't that significant in the landscape, but nevertheless, it's contained within the form enclosed by Baker Street and High Road. To me, it complies with what would be determined either moderate or weak impact on purposes of Greenbelt designation. And because it's not strong impact, I cannot therefore say that it's... Sorry, I do beg your pardon. I can't remember where I was almost then. I think that because it does not comply with what is determined as a strong contribution to green belt purposes, then I have to find it as grey belt, as the PPG says.
Okay, thank you. I think what we can probably, it's as things stand, it's a reasonably subjective judgment, I'd say, whether it is green or grey, because to me a public footpath isn't a strong boundary or even or any sort of boundary. So anyway, so I think we can maybe agree that there's a subjective element to the definition. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. David, I'd like to go back to what Mr. Hughes was saying in terms of sustainability. And I think we do need to be clear. So he mentioned that the Education Department, Healthcare, Highways, Archaeology and the Urban Design Department had all either considered it unsustainable or raised objections. I'm aware that A, you haven't had the right to reply on that one, but B, that's quite a broad spectrum of objections. So I'd like to understand, is that the case? If not, if that is the case, why are we pushing ahead with it?
It's not the case in all aspects, and I think I'll try and cover it, if I may. The urban design section have submitted a representation which says that the site is not in a sustainable location. That judgment was made by an architect, not a qualified planner, nor in the light of all policy guidance or advice that is contained either in your adopted plan or the MPPF. Now, of course, I also look at judgments relating to appeals in other districts for similar developments, and I am absolutely convinced that the site is a sustainable site. In terms of the planning situation, sustainability, as you know, is defined by economic, social, and environmental objectives. And I've assessed all of those in the report. There's also an additional requirement which relates to sustainable location, and that refers particularly to paragraph 110 of the MPPF, which says that it should be well related to alternative modes of transport. Now, it is the case that I consider the frequency of bus services which run up and down Baker Street and along High Road to be of sufficient frequency to determine that this is a sustainable location. So that's why I have concluded it's a sustainable location and why I have determined that urban design is completely wrong in their submission. In terms of other matters, archaeological representation has not said this is an unsustainable site, and they have not objected to the development per se. Of course, they want to protect the archaeological features that are known to be present and further record them. I think the comment was made that this was a desktop. I think that, in fact, it's gone beyond desktop. There have been evaluation trenches across the site. I know further evaluation is required before development can start, and that is covered by one of the conditions. In terms of other contributions, NHS require a contribution to mitigate the impact of the development. They don't object to it, but they require that contribution, and the contribution will form part of a legal agreement. So I think that's really generally where I'm coming from with regard to those comments.
Thanks, David. So you will agree, though, that that's quite a few different council council experts who've expressed concerns. Whether you feel you've been able to answer them, that's quite a few different parts of the council saying we're not so sure. Well, and I appreciate that some of these can be dealt with by conditions, but I'm not used to seeing that many saying we're not so sure about this.
There are two council departments that have objected. One is, shall we say, the concern expressed by urban design, and the other by the education department.
Thanks, and that brings me on to my second question, because you mentioned that, as I think you said, and I appreciate I'm picking you up on specific words, but I think on something that's important you have to. So you mentioned an education contribution is not totally necessary. Now, my reading, something is or it isn't. Could you explain your thought process there a bit further? Is there a need for a further education contribution or not?
I am recommending to members that there is not. The simple reason is that the published data, which is provided within the childcare information produced by Thurrock Council, and the pupil places plan, which I think has recently been updated to 2025, shows that within the catchment there are surplus places, that this development can be accommodated. In terms of catchment, I'm well aware that Alsett Primary School at the moment is marginally under capacity but will be oversubscribed by 2028. That's the forecast. So it may be that people might have to travel further, or it may be that residency criteria will apply, and that for Alsett School it may draw more children from the local area rather than in-commuting, which I know happens at some schools. I don't know whether it happens at Alsett, to be absolutely truthful, but I know in some rural schools, such as Horndon, for example, they do suffer from pupils living outside the area coming in to fill places.
Right, sorry, I'm not entirely sure. So this effectively is what we're saying would happen if we are meeting the need through neighbouring schools. They are basically going to be in commuting.
For primary schools, within a 2-mile radius, there are surplus school places sufficient to cater for this development. With regard to secondary schools, within 3 miles, and I'll explain those two measurements in just a moment, there are sufficient school places to satisfy those generated by this scheme. The reference to 2 miles for primary schools, if you have to travel more than 2 miles to take your child to school, you will qualify for free school transport. Similarly, for secondary schools, if you travel more than 3 miles, you qualify for free school transport. So that there may be some schemes in the district that will be considered in the future where contributions relate to the provision of school transport rather than school places. In this case, none is required.
Thank you, David. Aaron.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, David, for your report. While I respect you're not from education, there is actually no catchment areas in Thurrock. So, and while we've got, I believe it's about 95 people in the borough looking for schools, how can there be a surplus of places?
Because your report says so, your pupil places report. In fact, the pupil places plan does have catchment areas. They may be notional, but there is obviously west of the authority, central district and rural. And that's how they're split up with regard to both primary and secondary education, and that's how they're presented in the report. With regard to places overall, you have a surplus in all areas. I can't answer the question as to why there are 95 people looking for schools, because I don't know where that figure comes from, and I don't know the explanation for it. But basically, there is a surplus of school places throughout the borough, and it will increase over the next 5 years with the falling birth rate. And as you know, that fluctuates over time, so that beyond 2028, 29, birth rate may go up, and that may take up some of the surplus places, and you will be required to provide more school places.
Thank you, David.
Thanks.
Russell, then Steve.
Good evening, Dave. Thank you for your report. Can you please help me out with the grey belt definition again? Because the last time I looked at this particular site, there was horses grazing on grass, and I really can't see how that can be a grey area.
I suppose to most normal, ordinary people, it would look green. It's as simple as that. It's undeveloped. Yes, it's laid to grass, and yes, there are horses grazing. But I do point to a couple of things. I've already mentioned the MPPF glossary definition of grey belt and the PPG, which gives further guidance on how you define the characteristics of grey belt sites. But I also need to point out to the evidence base for the local plan and the Stantec report, which was dated 2019, which examined greenbelt functions. Now, greenbelt functions in terms of grey belt relate to restriction of urban sprawl, that's purpose A, merging of towns, that's purpose B, and protecting the setting of historic settlements, that's purpose D. The Stantec report didn't assess category D, but it did assess purposes A and B, and it ruled that this site had no function in preserving or preventing urban sprawl or the merging of towns. I can only point to the evidence that's straight in front of me that states quite categorically that this would then fall within the grey belt category in the current MPPF.
We're often asked to look at things, the smaller developments that we are told are within the Greenbelt because the developments are within the Greenbelt. I'm looking, say, at extensions of houses and things like that. Well, then we're told to refuse them because they're within the Greenbelt, but they're in an estate of houses already, and you try to tell us that that is Greenbelt, and now you try to tell us this area of land isn't Greenbelt.
I simply point to the definition of grey belt that's in the MPPF, the additional guidance in the PPG. Yes, there will be a lot of occasions where you will be faced with maybe a small development which protrudes into the green belt, where there are no physical boundaries to that site, where it may be inappropriate form of development, and therefore you will refuse it, be likely to refuse it on that ground. I can only give you the converse example, which came to committee probably 3 or 4 months ago, relating to a development of 6 dwellings to the rear of Sandown Road, Southfields, which was recommended for approval in the green belt, but because of the containment of the site within built form and readily recognizable barriers to spreading of development beyond the site itself, you determine to grant permission. Now that's a different case, and it is clearly identified in the MPPF.
Thanks, Russell. Steve, and then I'll bring Ashley.
Thanks, Chair. David, there's 2 things that have just come to mind listening to your what you were saying about, I don't want to get into debate yet, but about the sustainability. And you were saying that there are supposed to be 1,100 homes per annum built in Thurrock. And I've given that in London recently, when I looked the figures up, they built less than 2% of what they were supposed to build. But that extra 1,100 per annum would place a demand on schools. So where you're saying that actually you're predicting that the demand for schools would decline, if Thurrock were to achieve that, I'm struggling to see that adds up, because in my maths it certainly doesn't.
I can well understand your concern, and it's something that the local authority will have to grapple with the emerging plan. The fact is that the core strategy is now out of date. It's got 1 year left to run in terms of its forecast growth when it was first produced in 2015. And yes, it does have an objectively assessed need which it's not meeting at the moment. So that's not put the pressure on the schools that you would normally expect, because we're just not building the houses. But we are required to build houses.
So do you not see the dichotomy there, that actually, if we achieve that, then there won't be enough schools, and you're saying currently that there are enough, when there's evidence from somebody who sits on the education committee that there's a shortage of schools. So I don't know where we are in this, but it strikes me that somebody's not marked their homework properly, because the numbers are just...
I refer you to the pupil places plan, which actually demonstrates that there is a surplus of school places, and that's produced by Thurrock. But I do fully agree with you that in order to meet its housing targets, Thurrock is going to have to look at all the infrastructure requirements that come with all those houses and also plan for that. And that's a job really for the local plan.
Sorry, absolutely, and I agree. Thank you for. I'm not sure we made any progress on that. Just going back to what Councillor Sisterson was asking about the definition of grain belt, and I've had the discussion previously with Ashley and some of the other people in planning, that at this moment in time we have not redefined grey belt in Thurrock. So where you said earlier your view was subjective, it's a subjective view that you're putting forward. Is that true?
I suppose to a degree it's subjective, but it's firmly based on the advice in national guidance. So that's the way I've interpreted national guidance, as we all interpret national guidance. And that's my professional view. And it's also based on evidence that I've had from other appeals in similar situations.
Thank you. I'll come back to it later. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Steve. Before we, I know Kathy wants to come in with a question, but before we do that, Ashley wanted to just give us a couple of words.
Thank you, Chair. So it's just really to support David's comments, and just conscious that we'll be moving into debate. So there's a number of matters here that you've raised which are material planning considerations and you will need to give weight to. What I would draw your attention to is within the case officer's report, there's quite extensive detail which answers a number of the questions that have been raised. So with respect to Greenbelt, that's covered in detail at section 13.4, and that talks about grey belt. So that is a matter of judgment at this moment in time. The council do not have a green belt assessment. So committee now need to make a decision on this application in front of them. And as officers, we consider that this is grey belt. So that's the officer position. I would also draw your attention to paragraph 15.17 of the report. So be conscious of that when you are debating the point. So if you do decide it's not grey belt, and you will need to consider those points at section 13.4 in coming to any such conclusion, you'll then need to consider paragraph 15.7. In terms of the comments from other services, they are material planning considerations, so design comments and education comments, so you can give them weight, absolutely. I'll just remind committee that they are specifically looking from a specific service area. The job of the planning officer is to balance all of those material planning considerations, which is a difficult ask, but fundamentally that's why you've got the recommendation in front of you. Case officer and myself have balanced those considerations to come to a conclusion. And when we're doing that, we are cognizant of the pressures on those services. We are cognizant of the pressure on education and the responsibility of the education authority. From a planning point of view, what we need to consider is, can we sustain that position? So the position within this case is we do not consider we can sustain the education comments that are being put forward from a planning perspective, and that's set against Regulation 122, which is the test that we need to consider. But again, within the report, David has set out answers to those points at section 13.13 onwards, and then with respect to design, it's 13.6. And I think when you do get onto the debate, I think it may be helpful if you wish David to point you to sections of that report, then by all means we can do that. I'll leave it there, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Ash. Kathy, you wanted to come in.
I think it's what we've covered anyway, but I did read the planning practice guidance, and it said land is a strong contribution to Greenbelt if it's free from existing development and lacks physical features in reasonable proximity that could restrict and contain development. So, yeah, in my point of view, that I'd say it does strongly contribute, but I think maybe we can agree it's subjective. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. Do we have any more questions for David, or shall we move on to the debate? Oh, Srikanth.
Thank you, Chair. Regarding page number 27, so environmental impact assessment. This development is exceeding the over 5 hectares, so it's required like a EIA assessment. So as per the EIA officer, like clearly mentioned that there is a significant effect will happen through this development. And if we see the page number 28, applicant environmental statement, there are major important topics scoped out. Number 1, built heritage, landscape. Number 2, landscape. And number 3, visual impact, ecology, biodiversity, flood risk, ground conditions, transport and access, noise, vibration, lighting, climate change, and waste management. So these are the core important things as per the EIA. So applicant is scoped out. So how confident you are that without verification, proper recommendation from this one, how can we move forward this one?
The environmental statement that was submitted covers all of those matters in any event, and they are part of the planning considerations. But the one factor which was so important, which made this an EIA, development, relates specifically to the archaeological evidence of previous occupations on the site. It scoped out certain other matters as being of less importance and not requiring as significant details, but nevertheless, they are all matters that are carefully considered. So, for example, impact on nearby listed buildings. It was determined that the distance of the nearest listed buildings from the site and the intervening development was sufficient to determine that there was no adverse impact on the heritage asset. So that's how all the matters were scoped.
Srikanth, if you don't mind, I think legal counsel would like to come in on something.
It's just one very small point. In that section of the officer's report, it also notes that any of the impacts that do or did persist after the scoping opinion, officers consider they can be mitigated through conditions, which is of course something that the committee needs to consider, whether otherwise unacceptable development could be made acceptable through the use of conditions. And you've heard from David that in the officer's view, conditions do deal with those impacts, so that with conditions, it's not unacceptable.
Thank you. Just my concern is if anything goes wrong during the construction, who will be the responsible, from the council or from the applicant developer side?
When you say anything goes wrong, can you be more specific?
As per like vapor gas is leakage, and we have clearly mentioned that report, there is a leakage, vapor gas leakage. So that's the thing I'm having concern about that one. Because not only we are thinking about the current one, future residents also it's going to impact about the vapor.
A lot of these matters are the subject of conditions that still require to be discharged. So further details on how this development proceeds will be submitted to the council to satisfy those conditions and will be vetted by all the relevant experts within the council or externally that are required to vet those on behalf of the council. That's how we avoid making mistakes, generally.
I have one more question. Regarding the trip from the highways one, like CTMP, Construction Traffic Management Plan, was required by the National Highway. So through this development, I'm having concern that how confident the development cause unacceptable congestion or highway risk, particularly at peak times.
I'll let the highways officer deal with that question. In terms of construction-related traffic, all those matters are going to be the subject of a detailed construction and environmental management plan, which of course has to take account of the Lower Thames Crossing activity in the area as and when that occurs. But in terms of the permanent impact of additional traffic movements, perhaps Matt would like to have a quick word about that.
Thank you, Chair. So as part of the Construction Traffic Management Plan, which they would have to submit to the Council for approval, National Highways have also expressed an interest in that because of Lower Thames Crossing. And as part of that plan, there will be designed into it routes for HGV traffic to get to the site, so it doesn't affect sensitive areas such as Orsett Village. The main high road of Baker Street is envisioned that it's likely to use Baker Street to the south and the A1013 Stamford Road as the main access point, because that is the most appropriate road where there isn't weight limits and sensitive areas.
Thank you, Officer. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Srikanth. So I'm going to suggest we move on to the debate. Don't think I'm depriving anybody else of any questions, am I? So, who would like to start? Who's got thoughts they would like to share? Steve.
Thanks, Chair. It comes as no big surprise, does it, since I rattle on about the Greenbelt. However, this, and I yet, shall we say, don't agree with David's assessment of it being grey belt, since, as far as I'm aware, when you look across, I would have said trees are a sign of openness that continues beyond that anyway. But there are a number of things that bother me. So, as the Speaker said earlier, there are roughly 100 properties in Baker Street, which is a hamlet. It's a separate hamlet, and so the effect, the impact is 50 that it backs onto, 50 that are in the associated area, and we're talking about adding 150. Now, knowing what's happened before and seeing several mentions in this document about viability, whether that ends up as 150 or not is an entirely different matter. We've seen it happen before at Red Row, which was 50 and a hospice of about 12 beds, and the hospice shrunk to about 3 beds, and the scheme went up to 83, all because of viability. So the first thing I'd say is I'm not convinced that it's only 150, but does it seem appropriate in a hamlet to make it over double the size it already is? So that's a big concern in my head. In places and going back to what I just said about the number of houses, in places in your document, so the document I have here, it talks about seeks 50%, seeks is not the same as will deliver, and in other places it says will deliver. So there's a mismanagement there, because it either does or it doesn't, as far as I'm concerned. It's not seeks to, because again, we've seen the viability argument hit us time and time and time again, where what we start off with as 50, in this instance affordable, ends up being shrunk because the site's no longer viable. Honestly, having sat here for as many years as I have, there are endless times that's happened. So I'm very suspect of any of those numbers, particularly when it says something along the lines of seeks to. It's placing it talks further, and that's why I wondered if you've ever actually been there, because it's further on, it talks about relatively good provision of shops and services. I don't know what that means in your terms, but one little corner shop, I would hardly say is adequate provision of shops and services. That would be my take on it. Unless you want to drive down the A13 and go to the Marks and Sparks that's almost at Stamford. So that kind of worries me, that no one's really aware of what that site is all about and how it's used currently and how it could potentially be used. I've got a whole list of things here that I could go on and on about, but the fact that the schools are oversubscribed, you're saying, well, maybe not, and then we're saying, well, we should have 1,100 extra houses. Well, that means they'll definitely be oversubscribed. What's the plan to provision that in the future? And meanwhile, the problem is more immediate. It's not looking into the future, it's an immediate problem. So this is only going to exacerbate that problem in completely the wrong place, where the only primary school is oversubscribed and consistently has been for some years. So, and it's been expanded to the maximum of the site. So there isn't a quick fix there, and expecting children to travel 2 miles to school in the morning, it just means everyone's going to drive. So then whatever school they go to, you just exacerbate the problem with more vehicles. I'll stop for there just in case anybody else wants to say anything, but I'm quite happy to come back. But the bottom line is, I think it's a completely inappropriate development in that site. So I don't have a problem with the actual development. I have a problem with its location and the fact that it just destroys another hamlet. There's very little left in Thurrock, and it just will destroy it, just because it will totally overwhelm it, the same as the hospital site did some years ago. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Who would like to comment next? We've been very quiet on this. Okay, Tom and then Kathy.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So obviously I've been on planning for some time, and I think what we all need to take notice of is that planning has changed pretty much over the last 12 months. We're now, we've got 30 years of MPPF legislation in front of us, and respectfully, the government do want more homes, and they've now thrown in this new legislation, which is Greenbelt. And I think what we're experiencing here tonight for the first time in a very long time is how much the game has changed. This application would have been up for refusal 2 years ago, but Greybelt's come in, and I do have sympathy with how the officers are now trying to dissect this legislation. You can see on the appeal page, even the appeal inspectors are having trouble trying to work out what is Greybelt and what is Greenbelt. And I think what we need to be wary of is that we have options tonight. We can refuse this. There's quite a bit there to probably sink your teeth into at appeal stage. But if the professional officer's opinion on Greybelt is the same as the appeal inspector's opinion, then we've not seen nothing yet here in Thurrock. And I think we need to also be very careful with these sorts of applications. If it's good enough here, then it's going to be good enough in other areas as well. So it is a difficult one, probably a controversial point, but I live south of the A13, and you know we've taken a lot. I do think rural areas need to take their fair share as well, respectfully, and we'll see where we are. It is a good scheme. I do sympathise with what Mr. Taylor's saying. Sometimes we get these schemes with there's a lot on here to get excited about. Will it come to fruition? Well, we will just have to find out. But an incredibly difficult one. If it goes to appeal, it would be really interesting to see what happens. But I'll stick with the professional officer's opinion. And I do have sympathy with what these officers are having to deal with. This is 30 years it took to put this legislation together, and the government have come along and gone, no, actually, there's something that's called Greenbelt, and you've got to deal with it. And then that's why I think officers are now struggling to try and dissect, what sort of approvals they should have to this. I mean, Allset as an example. I mean, I've had many schemes in the last few years. You couldn't build anything within 300 metres of a church, and all of a sudden, that's no longer a problem. So this is something we just have to get used to. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Tom. So it's Kathy, then Jackie, then Russell.
Thank you. I mean, I fully understand what Tom's saying there, and I do understand we are obliged to build houses, and we need houses, so I'm not arguing with that obligation, but I think that this is a controversial scheme. I don't think we have to define it as grey belt, personally. I think that, we haven't got the boundaries. I've got a big problem with education putting in an objection, because I think for one of the main concerns of residents who oppose new developments is that there's no infrastructure. Now we're having education telling us there's no infrastructure. So how can we go against that? Where will they go to school? They'll drive to wherever. And these are primary 5, 6-year-olds. They want to go to the local school. So on those two counts, they're the main. Although also I would say it does look on the face of it a good scheme if it was somewhere else. And I would also, if they can't say, is it the local housing allowance level, is it going to be capped at that? And will they come back, like we've seen before, and say, no, that's no longer viable, we're going to have to charge more rent, this sort of thing, it's not set in stone. So, I just think there's too many questions, personally. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. I think it was Jackie next and then Russell.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'm also concerned about the education aspect, to be honest. I appreciate what you said about there's 95 or 94. We're undersubscribed, 94 places. But there is no doubt we have got an influx of people coming from London who have larger families. And the schools will soon become oversubscribed double fast. So I'm very concerned about that. I'm also really concerned about this definition of grey belt. I mean, like Ash said, we don't have a green belt assessment. Did you say that, Ash? You did, didn't you?
That's correct,
yeah.
Yes.
So therefore, I'm not going to recognise this as grey belt. I think because we are so poor with delivering our housing, we're so below our targets, I feel we're really stretching the boundaries of what can be called grey belt. In order to meet our targets, I think we're really, really stretching it, what we're saying. And again, this is not planning consideration, but like Richard, I think his name was, said, everybody's got a right to a home. That includes the wildlife in my book. So it's going to be no surprise that I will not absolutely be voting for this at all. But I do come here with an open mind.
Thanks, Jackie. Russell?
Thank you, Chair. I don't trust this assessment that it is a grey belt that can be built upon. There will be other opportunities coming to build, even on green belt. At least then we'll be honest in calling it what it is. And some of those opportunities may involve or include NHS, school places and sports facilities in that possibly larger development. And that may go a long way to satisfying the needs of Thurrock's housing. This, I think, is quite insincere to call this a grey belt area. It is green, and for us to start calling it something else just to get these houses built, I think is possibly being insincere.
Thanks, Russell. Steve and then Aaron.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, no one likes to build on green belt or even grey belt, and especially in a hamlet as lovely as Baker Street. So there's many arguments in favour and against the development, but our expert recommends it. I'm swayed by the facts, but it's very, very much 50-50. And the thing that sort of really concerns me is this week, as a local authority, we're sending people out to Harlow, Southend, because we can't accommodate them in Thurrock. You know, what does that do to their schooling? What does that do to their doctoring and hospitalisation and stuff like that? It's immense change. There's 7,000 families on the waiting list and 600 families in temporary accommodation. So, with heavy heart, I will say I'm in favour of accepting the experts' recommendations.
Thanks, Steve. Aaron? Okay, if you go first, Aaron, and then I'll bring.
Thank you, Chair. Whatever the admission place is and whatever we've got on the list, there is people waiting for school places here in Thurrock. It's 95-50, whatever. There is people. But on the other side, we have an urgent need for housing here in Thurrock. And the Greenbelt assessment does say if it's urgent need and certain categories have been met, and I believe it has. And same as Steve, with a heavy heart, I would have to go with the officer's recommendation on this one.
Thanks, Aaron. Ash?
Thank you, Chair. So a number of members have touched on this. So obviously you're within your gift to come to a decision on grey belt. Officers have come to a view that it is grey belt. What I would say is what you haven't touched upon is paragraph 15.17 of the report, which is if you come to the conclusion that you do not consider grey belt, you then need to consider, do very special circumstances apply? With this application, the tilted balance is triggered. So you need to give that consideration. So officers have said, irrespective, VSC does apply in this case. The other point on education, so if the sole factor was to become education, officers have considered that we do not think we can sustain an education contribution or an objection. You'll note within your committee report at 13.13.14 that the applicant has said they are willing to make an education contribution. So if members were, say, minded, then that could be included, and we could go away and work with the applicant as part of refining the 106 to come up with a suitable education contribution. If it's okay, Chair, I'll just bring in legal counsel just to add to those points.
Again, I think the officer has set this all out, both in opening and in the reports. Just on green belt, grey belt, I think it is useful to go back to the definition given in the NPPF to sort of provide the framework for how the officers reached the conclusion here. So grey belt land is defined as land in the green belt, comprising previously developed land and or any other land that in either case doesn't strongly contribute to any of purposes A, B, or D. And those purposes are set out in the officers' reports, namely to check the unrestricted sprawl of large built-up areas, prevent neighbouring towns merging into one another, and preserve the setting and special character of historic towns. You've heard the officers' review, it's set out in the plan. It has also been noted that the officers' view is supported by the 2019 Strategic Green Belt Assessment that was completed on behalf of the Council. So there are reasons to back up why the grey belt test is met in these circumstances. to also pick up on Ashley's final point about education and contributions, with respect to education, for one moment, you would need to consider, if you wanted to refuse on that basis, whether it significantly and demonstrably outweighed the benefits of this scheme. But you'd also need to consider whether the unacceptable educational consequences, if you consider there are unacceptable consequences, could be made acceptable through the use of conditions or planning obligations. So if education is one of the areas that's causing you concern, as Ashley has noted, you should consider whether or not 106 agreement can address those concerns.
Thanks for that. Okay, so we've got Jackie and Erin again. Yeah.
Thanks, Chair. David, you said about this, if you're living 2 miles further away from the school that your child goes to, there's obviously school transport, but that's also oversubscribed currently. For my day job, I see complaints coming in on a daily basis from parents that can't get their children onto the school transport. So I appreciate that that's there, but that's also not really viable for people that have got to get their children to school. So that's another thing that concerns me as well.
Thanks, Chair.
Sorry.
Sorry, I was caught for a second. Aaron.
So thank you, Chair. So when we do go for the recommendations, would we be able to add that then about Section 106 for education? I think that would smooth a lot. For me personally, that would help alleviate that issue.
So if you consider that this is unacceptable development on the basis of the educational consequences, you need to consider whether it will be made acceptable through the use of conditions or planning obligations. Here it's a planning obligation. If that is the way that you and other members are leaning, it's something that you should consider. The 106 obviously has to be agreed with the applicant. We have heard from the officer at the start of the presentation that they're willing to consider contributions as reasonably required.
Aaron?
Yeah, as suggested, I'd like to go with that if that's possible, and if everyone else is in agreement.
Hang on to that one. We'll come on to that. Any further comments as far as the debate is concerned? Steve and Kathy.
Thanks, Chair. Just something that came out when Councillor Lilliard was speaking about the number of people that are currently on the housing waiting list, but I'm not sure how directly this would have any impact on helping them. And the thing that worries me even more is, and I've got it in my bag, a report from, I think it was 18 months ago, that 54% of the houses that were sold in Thurrock in the preceding 12 months were not to people from Thurrock. They were all sold to people that had come from outside of the area. So much as I agree with your sentiment, I kind of struggle with that because I'm not sure that it's actually going to do very much for that list. Thanks.
Thanks, Chair. Housing has an agreement with a lot of the housing associations that they take people from our waiting lists straight onto their books, and that's been done for many years. So I am convinced that many of our people on the waiting list will fill those 75 houses or whatever. And if we're talking about education, you know, 1 or 2 people that have to travel 2 miles, what about the people that are literally being sent to Southend, Central London, Harlow? You know, how do you think they get to school with their kids? Please give it some thought, because it's absolutely tragic. It really is.
Just to come in on that one, just having a look again at the applicant's statement, it does mention that Thurrock Council will retain the rights of nomination for the rental properties anyway. I don't think you can do that purchase properties. So they would be able to ensure that those properties were allocated to Thurrock people, just as a point of detail. I'm going to bring in Kathy first, Russell, and then yourself.
Thank you. Going back to what Aaron was saying, I think the problem with the 106 is not that they're not willing to give anything to education, but it's actually that Allsip Primary hasn't got the capacity to expand. So even if you gave them money for expansion, they wouldn't be able to. And also to come back to Steve, and I do understand the problem of people in temporary accommodation having to travel in for their schools, their children's schools. I know cases of that. But to bring in 150 new homes is not going to help, because you've got however, we had it broken down. We got even more children looking for school spaces. So I'm not convinced on the. I agree on the housing. It will help, but in terms of education, I'm not sure that will help. Thank you.
We'll come back to you, Steve. I think it's Russell next after Kathy. Have I got that right? Yes, I've got you down next. Okay, then Steve.
Just to say, Chair, that the income from these properties to the local authority will be, let's say, approximately £300,000 per year. It may take 2 or 3 years to build them all out, by which time the income and the planning for schooling or GP surgeries will happen, as they have done for many, many decades in the past. They meet the needs of the local people and the local kids. So I'm quite confident that these problems will be overcome.
Thanks, Steve. Aaron.
Thank you, Chair. I totally get what Kathy was coming from with Allsip Primary, but you've got William Edwards just less than 2 miles away, which is available, I presume, and David, could you answer this, to be extended if need be?
Yeah, that school has a lot of spare capacity. It could be extended, but I should
Gents,
point out...
just to sort of bring in, that's a secondary school, so we're probably mixing two things here.
Yes, you are. I was just coming to that is a secondary school. So secondary contributions are just not required, full stop. The key problem, I think, with most schemes that we've got in at the moment relate to primary education, because of the need to be closer to where the primary school is. However, the key test is all those schools within 2 miles should be considered, because there are no school travel costs involved. Yes, it may mean people using their car to go to the school, but that's what the Highway Impact Assessment has considered in the first place. We'd be foolish not to.
Thanks, David. Anybody else? Tom?
Well, what I was going to say, Chair, is obviously we've heard from 3 members that seem to be in favour, 3 against. So it's really just, I think, coming to some form of conclusion, either approval or refusal, and then when we know where we're going, we can look at maybe divvying up what potentially we want to see, either in a rejection or an approval. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. I was kind of getting to the same conclusion. It strikes me that there are a number of general points on which I don't think anybody would disagree. On the one hand, the need for more homes for Thurrock people. On the other hand, the need for children, if they're going to be housed and brought up in a certain area, to be able to go to school in that area. I don't think we would come to any disagreement on some of these fundamentals. It seems to me that it comes down to 2 things. One is whether you agree with the designation of this site as grey belt, and secondly, if you don't agree with it, whether you feel that there are very special circumstances, because effectively it stands or falls on those 2. And personally, I mean, I don't like it. I don't like this at all. It feels to me like the lack of housing is going to be used as a stick to beat us with on just about every large development that comes down the line. And the fact that we need more homes doesn't necessarily mean we need them in this particular location. I am uncomfortable with the definition that's been given in terms of the boundaries of this site. I note that we've effectively said it doesn't meet A and B, but it doesn't look like D was particularly examined. This is around the heritage and archaeological and historic sites. I think, David, you mentioned that hadn't been particularly followed through. Am I right on that?
It wasn't examined in the 2019 report. I've examined it and found that it does not strongly contribute.
Okay, so, and I appreciate, David, one thing I will say is that you are to a degree constrained by particularly the changes in the rules. I think a couple of years ago this might have been an easier one to rule on. So I don't think at any point we're saying we don't like you because you come up with these conclusions. You are slightly being, what's the word? I'll choose my words carefully. You are under the cosh a little with the changes in the planning policy and the balance, the tilted balance, I think is tilting against us in this particular circumstance. And I'm afraid I'm with one or two of my colleagues who said, I don't particularly like it, but I'm struggling to see how I can justify knocking it back unless we can come up with a good reason why it's not grey belt. If we can't do that, then I'm afraid we've got nothing more substantial than we'd rather it wasn't here. Russell.
As I said earlier, the last time I looked at the land, there were horses grazing on it, and it looked like a green field. It's like if it looks like a duck and it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's a duck. I think this is Greenbelt, and it's there for a reason. It separates the hamlet of Baker Street from the village of Horset, and should it be built upon, then the two will combine. And if we're going to defend Greenbelt, then we need to defend Greenbelt. But there will be some times when Greenbelt can and must be built on, because it will have at the same time schools, NHS surgeries, sports facilities. There will be support for those houses. But this particular location, I don't think supports everything else that needs to come with it. And as it's been pointed out as well, they're going to be going through the development of the Lower Thames crossing, and there's going to be a lot going on in that area, a lot for the residents to have to accept. And I feel that this particular bit of land is Greenbelt, not Greybelt.
Thanks, Russell. Jackie?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just an observation. I think Tom hit the nail on the head, actually, when he said 2-3 years ago we would probably not even be sitting here. The officers would have rejected it and it wouldn't have reached committee tonight. It's green, green, green.
Thanks, Jackie. I think in terms of looking ahead and thinking if we were to refuse this, we need to be refusing it on proper, not just on the fact we don't like it, but on proper concrete grounds, excuse the pun. But I'll put this one to you. 50 plus houses, and you add on 150 houses. To me, that does sound like urban sprawl. Are we in a position, I appreciate we've talked about this quite a lot, we are getting to the stage where we may be coming back to the same points. Are we in a position to take a vote? Okay, so the get my paper out. So the recommendation is that the Chief Planning Officer be authorised to grant permission for the development subject to those items set out in section 16 of this report, namely A, completion of the S106 obligation agreement, and B, planning conditions. Do I have a proposer for that recommendation? Steve.
106 with education here.
We vote on the recommendation as is. If it falls, then we can look at changing it, as he said. So we have a proposer. Do we have a seconder? Tom. Okay. All those in favour? Thank you. Those against? Now, we need to be clear about why we are refusing this. So we will need a counter-proposal. Does anybody have a counter-proposal in mind? Kathy?
I've got a reason why we don't need to consider it as grey belt, if that would help.
Thanks. Well, we need to bear in mind we need to be able to refute both the idea that it's grey belt and the idea that there are very special circumstances.
I think the education objection would go against the very special circumstances, maybe.
Yeah, please, Ash.
Okay, thanks, Chair. So if members are minded to not go with the officer recommendation, there is the opportunity to insert the education contribution at this point. So if a member wants to do that as part of their recommendation, that can be added and that can then be voted upon. So what you then need to consider is, does that satisfy your concerns with the application?
Aaron.
I will do as Ashley suggested, so I'd like to propose that it's accepted with section 106 contributions for education. So I'd like to propose that.
Okay, Aaron, do you mind just repeating that? I think one or two of our audience didn't quite get it.
Okay, no problem. So I'd like to propose that the development is agreed with section 106 contributions for education.
So that's a counter proposal. Do we have a seconder for that? Steve. Okay. So all those in favour of that altered recommendation? Those against? It's a perfectly sensible idea, Aaron, but I think probably if our concern were around the section 106, we could have dealt with it via that rather than refusing it. I think our concern is more fundamental, but it was worth putting the recommendation. We still therefore need a counter recommendation as to why we are refusing permission. And Steve, you've been dying to get in. Apologies, mate. On you go.
Sorry, thanks, Chair. I'm just confused why we're looking for a counter recommendation. In other words, we have a single recommendation.
Yeah,
So,
sorry, Steve. I'm
right?
probably saying it wrong. A refusal still needs a reason. And I probably ought to be calling it a refusal rather than a counter recommendation, but I was meaning to counter the recommendation, if you get what I mean. So, yeah, it's a refusal, but we still need a proposal, and we need to know why we're refusing. So, Jackie, you had your hand up first, and then Russell.
Thanks, Chair. So can we just keep it simple and say it's harmful to the green belt, urban sprawl and everything else? Can we make that work?
And do we have any form of words as to why we shouldn't count it as very special circumstances? I'm going to suggest that, so may I suggest this? We're refusing it on the grounds that it's harmful to the green belt. We believe that is the case by its very nature. We do not believe that it meets the classification of grey belt because of the consideration of the boundaries. And we do not consider that it meets very special circumstances because it doesn't meet the infrastructural requirements in terms of education and clinical provision. And don't ask me to say that again. Steve.
Sorry, Chair. I've written them down anyway, but the other one that I would have added is inappropriate scale. It's just...
Sorry, Steve, I was getting advice there. Could you repeat yourself, mate?
Of course I can. All I'm saying is it's an inappropriate scale of development given its surrounding.
Thanks, Steve. As Ash has reminded me, a proposal has to come from a member, but that's good advice. Thank you, Steve.
I'll say it. Shall I say it?
So, Kathy, would you like to
Well, I'll just
say it again?
Yes, if it comes from him, just say it's the scale is inappropriate for the location in the hamlet of Baker Street.
Okay, refusing on the ground that the scale is inappropriate and that it doesn't meet. We have to make sure we are clear about this, that it doesn't meet very special circumstances because of the impact on education and medical provision. Steve, sorry, you had a point you wanted to make there.
I was just going to ask our legal representative whether that's actually material, you know, scale of, is the scale inappropriate? Is that material factors?
I think, Steve, if it helps, the scale speaks to urban sprawl. Purpose B of Greenbelt is to restrict urban sprawl, and we're arguing that to more than double the size of the hamlet does constitute urban sprawl.
I disagree with that as well, actually. I did actually count the number of properties in Baker Street, and it's a lot more than the 50.
Yeah, I think, to be honest, we probably did come to more than 50 when we tried to do the count, but it's still more than doubling it. I think, to be honest, Steve, clearly you will be able to, you are within your rights to disagree. That's why we'll go to a vote for it. Russell. Sorry, Russell, I don't think your microphone's on, mate. We're wasting your words.
See, it's not Greenbelt, which leads to urban sprawl. It does not meet the special circumstances as these can be met elsewhere, and the land can be assessed again after the LTC is completed.
I think that sounds good. So we now have at least two versions. We need to get down to one. So we're saying it remains Greenbelt. We do not believe that it meets the definition of grey belt because from the point of view of urban sprawl. We also agree, as you say, it doesn't meet educational or local medical requirements. Therefore, we do not believe that it constitutes very special circumstances. And I take the point that as an informative on the end of our recommendation, we're also suggesting that once we have a local plan, that we accept that may change. But I think if we try and add that into our refusal, it's almost like saying, not now. We are being asked to say now, yes or no. Does that make sense? So let's go on the now, and then we can worry about what happens in the local plan when it appears. So, Ash would like to join in?
Not to add reasons. So from what I've heard, members have identified harm to the greenbelt with reference to urban sprawl, does not meet grey belt, and no VSC are identified because it does not meet education, infrastructure and NHS requirements. It's inappropriate in scale and inappropriate in terms of location. And then we've got also reassessed after LTC completed. It's within members' gift to come up with those reasons. What I would say is I still do not consider that members have tackled the tilted balance. So I think you're at a point where you can go for minded to refuse on this. You've identified enough reasons. You've gone through grey belt. but I don't think you have tackled the tilted balance point in enough detail. So what I suggest, Chair, is if they're your reasons, you vote on those reasons, and then it's amended to refuse, and the item is effectively deferred, and we will have to bring the item back.
With respect, Ash, I think we probably feel we've addressed the tilted balance. Yes, we do accept that there's an insufficient housing supply. We just don't believe this is the location to remedy it. I think that would be is that a fair summary? So that would be our point in relation to the tilted balance. Yes, we totally understand it. We understand that the changes in policy mean that we should give strong weight to the provision of adequate housing when considering something like this. But my strong feeling from listening to you for the last hour or more is that while we agree with the need for more housing in principle, we don't think this is an appropriate location. Would that be fair? We're now going to see if they'll let me say that.
Like I say, Chair, I do not consider that you have satisfactorily demonstrated an assessment against the tilted balance, which in my view exposes the council to risk, and therefore, while you may wish to recommend refusal for those reasons, I do consider that this would need to come back with additional information from officers before you come to that final decision. So you can mind to refuse, but I'll bring in legal counsel because we're just looking at the Constitution as well, because we do need to consider the implications for the council in the long run in terms of this decision.
Thanks, Ash. Totally fair. Yeah, we do need to be within bounds. So,
just
Chris,
the
would you
only
like to come
point
in?
on the Constitution. So if the planning committees, and this is paragraph 7.2c of the planning committee element of the Constitution, if the planning committee's arguments against the planning officer's recommendations are very clear and substantiated and no longer tentative, the application should be determined at the meeting. If not, the application should be deferred. And I understand the concern is essentially whether or not the concerns expressed by members are sufficiently substantiated on the evidence set out in the report and what you've heard this evening.
Thanks, Chris. Sorry, I was deep in conversation there. Do Chris's comments make sense to yourselves?
Can I ask a question?
Kathy?
Just a question. The tilted balance question, does that apply to green belt and grey belt? Does that apply regardless?
I mean, if you're satisfied that the land isn't green belt, isn't grey belt, as it were, the harm to green belt is then one of the factors that you can consider in applying the tilted balance. I'll get the wording up.
I think we do very strongly, or a majority of us do very strongly feel that this doesn't constitute grey belt.
Chair, it does also mention, though, that if you think about it as Greenbelt, that it's about the impact on the 5 purposes of the Greenbelt collectively. So we've kind of gone down a bit of a rabbit hole by, I think, in going in the grey area, because what we're now looking for is something much more specific, and it's actually, there's 5. And where historically we used to have a table that was, we didn't have to agree with it because, again, it was subjective, but we did have a table that balanced it. But that isn't here. I did actually make a note of that earlier. So in terms of summarising the whole thing, that's kind of a quick way of looking at it. But we don't have that. So
I think, and David, please correct me if I'm wrong, I think the reason why we focused on A, B and D is because the fundamental definition of grey belt is where it doesn't meet A, B or D. So if you knock those 3 down, the 2 skittles that remain aren't enough. I think that's why we focused on those 3. I think we'll have white smoke in a second, and I'll come back to you.
Yeah, so I think ultimately the decision rests with yourself, committee. So if you are satisfied it's green belt and you're satisfied that VSC does not apply, while I recommend that we mind to you monitor reviews and we bring it back and defer it, you can ultimately make a decision tonight. But so you've had the advice from officers, it's now up to you to make a decision.
And just to be clear, so we either refuse, that's it, or we defer minded to refuse, which then puts the onus on the officer to address our concerns and our objections. I'm going to again put the recommendation to refuse to you. If that falls, we'll look at the recommendation to defer. Is that okay?
I just need to add an additional point. So I just had information come through to say we would be out of time with the application if we do defer. So ultimately there is a risk of non-determination appeal. Notwithstanding that, my view is what I've already raised. I don't think we're in a position to defend the recommendation.
Okay, and I think that it is worth taking that into account, but I am going to go to the recommendation to refuse. Do we have a proposer? Jackie. A seconder? Russell? All those in favour of refusing the application? Please get the hands right up because we don't want to be miscounted. Okay, and all those against refusing? So, the application is refused. I'm going to suggest if you wish to take a natural break, you've earned it. Oh, no, Russell's not here. Sorry, Russell. Yeah, we all feel like that. We'll give him a couple of minutes. I can't. Can I read that before he's? Can I read the standing? What is it? Can I go to the standing orders before Russell comes back?
No, it needs to be.
It needs to be. Yeah, full house. Yes, sorry. We'll have to just. Well, I say have to wait. It's only courtesy to wait, so we'll give it a couple of minutes before we restart. Okay, folks, we are about 8:15. In fact, we've just gone 8:15. So I would like to move a motion without notice to suspend Council Procedure Rule 11.1 to allow our meeting to continue beyond the 2.5-hour time limit. Yep. All those in favour? Excellent. So let's carry on. Item 8 is next. Land adjacent Lampits Hill and Gable Hall School, Southend Road, Corringham. And Alan, it's yourself to present the report.
Thank you, Chair. Before starting the presentation, just some clarifications. So the Council's ecologist and landscape officer has confirmed no objection to the development subject to appropriate planning conditions, which include a landscape and ecology management plan, habitat management and monitoring plan, and a comprehensive landscaping plan. The officer has also confirmed the findings of the landscape visual impact assessment submitted with the application, in that there would be no wider landscape implications if the development was to be permitted. And finally, we also, as part of the objections, we also have an objection from the MP, James McMurdoch. So moving on to the application. This is an application on land at Lampits Hill and Southend Road that wraps around Performers College here in the middle, and it's on the northern edge of Corringham. Lampits Lane and Brampton Close are located to the southern part of the site, where residential properties abut the application site. The land is designated as Metropolitan Greenbelt. It has a mix of fields, some outbuildings, hard standing, and instances of commercial uses. There is a public right-of-way that runs north and south throughout the site, which connects Southend Road to Lampits Lane, and the site is in flood zone 1, which means it's not subject to significant flooding, although the southern part of the site is subject to some instances of surface water flooding. The proposal seeks for up to 300 dwellings on the site. It's outlined in nature. The only thing for consideration is the principle of development and the access onto Lampits Hill. The number of units was reduced during the course of the application down to 300, because when the applicants did a detailed indicative proving layout to show how it would fit, it was quite evident that that was actually too much for the site. So they've lost 20 dwellings on the site, and the layout that's before you, it's only indicative in nature, but it shows how you can get the instances of green space, separation distances are robust. Another significant consideration which was dealt with was the relationship with the existing properties to the south. So there's a line here on this plan. You can see it. It's an indicative exclusion zone to make sure we have a minimum of 22 to 25 metres between the actual dwellings to ensure there's appropriate separation. And then you've also got the existing boundary screening that's there, which we'd look to get enhanced as part of any planning permission. As well as the 300 units, there's 50% affordable housing, so 150 affordable homes, a 70-bed care home, the new vehicular and pedestrian access from Lampits Hill, and also pedestrian access onto Southend Road and Lampits Lane. So you've got the pedestrian links which take you into the existing settlement and also take you northwards if you wish. There's public open space, equipped areas for play and green corridors, 10% biodiversity net gain on the site, which is a requirement of planning applications such as this, and then enhancement as well of the public right-of-way that runs through the site. So moving on to the principle of development, I think it's probably worthwhile if we have a quick run through the committee report, which everybody has. So if we start with paragraph 13.3.1, and obviously we talked about the tilted balance, so paragraph 11 of the National Planning Policy Framework, going to paragraph 13.3.1 of the committee report. In accordance with paragraph 11D of the National Planning Policy Framework, planning decisions should apply a presumption in favour of granting planning permission unless any adverse impacts of doing so would significantly and demonstrably outweigh those benefits. Now, as it states there, Thurrock cannot demonstrate the 5-year housing land supply. We have one of the worst housing land supplies in the country. This renders relevant housing policies out of date for the purposes of decision taking. So therefore, the presumption in favour of sustainable development therefore applies unless, so part 1, unless the NPPF protects areas of particular importance, which provides a strong reason for refusal. And then you have to refer to footnote 7 of the NPPF, which talks about actually Greenbelt is a reason to resist development. But then we've got the added nuance of the grey belt, which was introduced in December last year. And as Councillor Kelly said earlier, the game has changed. This is a fundamental difference to any previous iteration of the NPPF. So if we move on to, we'll move on to grey belt in a second, but if we move on to part 2 of paragraph 11 of the NPPF, as listed in the committee report, it refers to presumption in favour of sustainable development and granting unless the adverse impacts of doing so would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against the framework as a whole. So that is clearly a very high bar that's been set there, but then we must also go into the matter of the grey belt. So yes, this application site, it is within the green belt. Paragraph 143, which is the 5 purposes of the green belt, which was discussed during the previous debate. But the 3 of the 5 purposes, if this site does not contribute strongly, and again the word is strongly, to 3 of those 5 purposes, then it becomes grey belt. So those 5 purposes are A, which is to check the unrestricted sprawl of large built-up areas, B, to prevent neighbouring towns from merging, and then C, to preserve the setting and special character of historic towns. Now, we don't actually have any designated historic towns within the borough, so C is to be ignored in that regard. But going back to A and B, this site on the northern part of Corringham, it is visually and physically contained from the wider Greenbelt by defensible boundaries. You have the railway line to the north, you've obviously got existing built form to the south and west, and then you've got Fobbing to the east. And it's worth pointing out that Fobbing as a village, when you talk about towns merging, villages do not count. So any perceived merging or coalescence of those 2 settlements is irrelevant for the purposes of the new NPPF. So in terms of towns merging, you would have to go so far east, it would just be an irrelevance in terms of the size of the proposal in front of you, and really what it does is it squares off this part of Corringham. You couldn't call it a loss of visual separation or a merging of towns to the extent where it contributes strongly. So in that regard, it's deemed to be grey belt. And then we have to carry on moving through the NPPF with regards to whether or not it's appropriate grey belt development in the green belt. And that's the point. It's still green belt, but it's grey belt within the green belt. So paragraph 155, does it utilise grey belt land? Yes, we believe it does. Does it fundamentally undermine the purposes of the remaining green belt? No, we don't believe it does. There's a huge amount of green belt that sits around the site and stops it from any coalescence from any nearby town. Does it address a demonstrable unmet need? Yes, it does. We have a severe shortage of housing when assessed against our objective need. Is it in a sustainable location? Yes, it is. You can walk into Corringham, there's all the services there, there's the supermarket, there's the bus stops, the train station's a couple of miles away. So in that regard, we believe it meets all the criteria to be appropriate grey belt development. And then we need to look at whether or not it meets something called the golden rules. So the golden rules are things that you must do if you're going to bring forward grey belt development. So in the first instance, it's affordable housing. It needs to provide 50% in this instance, and it does, and that would be secured by Section 106 agreement. The second one is necessary improvements to infrastructure. In this case, it's going to provide contributions to education, to NHS, to crossing points, traffic calming on Lampett's Hill, again, which will be secured by Section 106. Thirdly, the provision of accessible green space, which would be provided, and it would be provided on the site. So the site does, or the proposal does meet the golden rules. And then working again through the MPPF, if you've ticked the boxes for the golden rules, paragraph 158 of the MPPF explicitly states significant weight should be given in favour of the grant of permission. So again, that weighs very heavily in the planning balance. Putting all that together, the view of officers is the principle of development is acceptable with regards to the grey belt pathway for this site. It's also incredibly important when you're looking at a grey belt site, and again working through the MPPF, but this time working backwards. The MPPF talks about putting substantial weight to any harm to the green belt, including its openness. That's been in the MPPF for years. But that's disapplied by virtue of footnote 55 of the MPPF, where it says if you are in the grey belt, that harm to the green belt no longer applies. This is a fundamental change from previous iterations of the MPPF. And it's very material for everybody tonight with regards to forming the view on this application with regards to the grey belt status and any other potential harm. And as already said, the landscape officer has looked at the scheme and doesn't consider there to be any wider landscape harm within the local area. On that basis, it's gone through the grey belt pathways. It's deemed to be acceptable development. But in this instance also, we are presenting that very special circumstances do exist, and they carry very substantial weight in the planning balance in favour of the development. So these include Thurrock's acute housing need, and I'm sure councillors are already very aware of this. But we also have the absence of any action plan to deliver housing. There's none, and we're obliged to as a council. We have one of the worst housing land supplies in the country, and that's a given. And so we work back to MPPF paragraph 11, the tilted balance, which is to permit, unless any adverse impacts significantly and demonstrably outweigh that harm. We've got the provision of a meaningful number of new homes here. It's 300 homes, including the over-provision of affordable housing versus the council's, well, it's 50% versus the council's policy requirement of 35. So it's 150 units in Corringham and in a sustainable location. It's probably worth, it's in the report as well, but to give an idea of our delivery of affordable homes, when we're going to get 150 on this site, in 2022 to 2023, 9 affordable units were built in the borough. It's also a sustainable location adjacent to the urban area where we've got a significant strategic employment hub in the form of DP World London Gateway. So with regards to making sure that we have those sustainable patterns of development, it's very close to a major employer. And then there's all the usual economic benefits about construction, employment, and operational phase with regards to occupation of the scheme and the knock-on effects with regards to local shops and services. So those very special circumstances considered to apply as well. And then moving on from that, we do have the loss of some agricultural land, but it's not high agricultural land of high worth. And the housing need and the location of development is considered to be acceptable. So in the balance, that's considered not a problem. So on that basis, we do consider it meets the gateways for the MPPF and the MPPG It utilises grey belt land, meets the golden rules, and it addresses demonstrable need in a sustainable location. So we believe it's established as an acceptable development despite the green belt location. And then even taking a precautionary approach, there are compelling, very special circumstances that exist to justify this proposal. I've already talked about housing needs, so I don't feel the need to labour that point, but it is an exceptional contribution toward affordable housing at 150 units. It is transformative when we look at what we could get from this scheme. The affordable housing would be secured by Section 106. The layout of the scheme, it is only indicative, but we do have parameter plans which accompany the application, and if permission were granted, we would ensure by condition that minimum amounts of green space are provided on site, local areas for play, drainage, dog walking routes, and then also making sure we've got that connection into the existing settlement. So, although not a matter for tonight in terms of the final design, we are comfortable that you do have a density that's appropriate to this site. It works at about 25 to 26 dwellings a hectare, so it's not dense by any sense of the imagination. There have been concerns raised about flooding, but the lead local flood authority, they've examined the application. They are very confident that it would not exacerbate flooding elsewhere, and there will be conditions and also a management plan required as part of the Section 106 to ensure that we secure that. We'll have the new junction on Lampett's Hill with crossing points, and then a scheme to be submitted with regards to traffic calming on that road. So again, that's a material benefit to the scheme. The parameters plan show a limit of 2 stories along the southern boundary of existing properties. So that's to make sure that there's an appropriate relationship between those dwellings, the existing dwellings and the new ones. And obviously that's it's a very significant concern of officers, and it's something we wish to secure through the decision-making process, that there won't be an unacceptable relationship there. As such, Chair, it's recommended for approval.
Thanks, Alan. We'll get the opportunity to ask Alan questions shortly, but we have a statement of objection from Anne Sandu. So, Anne, if you'd like to come down and join us. I don't know if Carly's shown you how to turn that thing on. It's the right-hand button. And as soon as I've shut up, you can start in your own time.
I have 3 minutes to speak, whilst the developer has been in talks with the planning officers since 2023. This application is based upon the false assumption that our greenbelt area is grey belt. The applicant suggests that our greenbelt consists of previously developed land and therefore can be built upon. This is not true. Only 7% of our greenbelt site has development upon it. 93%, yes, 93% is greenbelt. It is rolling farmland with boundary oak and hawthorn trees, hedges, and is full of biodiversity, as stated in ecological reports. The Council's Strategic Spatial Objective 1, SSO1, seeks to achieve sustainable communities in Thurrock with regeneration and growth focused in the existing urban areas, not the Greenbelt. Policy PMD6, Development in the Greenbelt, states the Council will maintain, protect and enhance the open character of the Greenbelt in Thurrock in accordance with the provisions of the National Planning Policy Framework. Changes to the new local plan to release Greenbelt has limited statutory weight given its early stage and likely adoption of spring 2028. Policies within the current development plan will continue to be used, which identifies this as Greenbelt. The southeast corner of our Greenbelt is edged by properties in Lampett's Lane, which are at a low to high risk of surface water flooding. Mitigation for the new dwellings includes raising floor levels above predicted levels, 300 millimetres. Existing residents' properties, which have floor levels in the risk zone, could be worsened by the building of the new estate. How will we be protected?
Has a surface water strategy requested by Anglian Water been undertaken? What of the properties bordering Brampton Road and Brampton Close? The Environment Agency predicts 59% more winter rainfall in just 25 years' time. Across the UK, events of rain dumping with its devastating consequences increases risk to all our properties. Residents would face this calamity alone. To conclude our 3 minutes of democracy, our green belt is not grey belt, and the development is not in accordance with the NPPF or the development plan, and as such is not in accordance with Section 70, brackets 2 of the Town and Country Planning Act. These are our material planning considerations, and we respectfully urge the Planning Committee to refuse this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. What we're going to do is ask the councillors if they want to ask you any factual questions based on what you've just been talking about. So, councillors, any questions for Anne? Right, I think that's generally a good thing. It means that was clear. Yes? Oh, Jackie, you have a question.
Sorry, thanks, Chair. How long have you lived there, Anne?
Lived there 37 years.
Okay, and it's never been built on while you've been there?
It's never what,
sorry? Been built on, there's been nothing there?
No. There are 3 bungalows at the far end that join Southend Road, and that's the only buildings.
Thank you.
Anybody else for Anne? Thanks. Oops, sorry. Yes, Russell.
Thank you for your objections there. Just looking at Google Earth, Google Maps, if I've got the right location of this Lampett's Hill junction with Southend Road. Sorry.
Right, so go.
It's just here.
That's Lampett's Hill. Come down,
right,
and Lampett's Lane is off the bottom there.
So that includes this area.
Gents, this isn't much of a spectator sport. I suggest you get on with the question.
It's just that I noticed that what appears to be the top end of the site, quite a few abandoned industrial type buildings. Would that be correct?
Well, they were bungalows, and I don't really know what use they've been put to. One has been used as a nursery and then became a fireworks cellar. But the majority of the land, 93, excuse me, 93% is greenbelt. It's not built on.
Yeah, I've got the right location. Thank you.
Thanks, Russell. Anybody else? Right, well, thank you very much, Anne, and you may resume your seat. Right, in that case, councillors, we'll go on to questioning Alan. You've got a very in-depth report there. I don't think we do. You do. Oh, sorry, it wasn't on my apologies. Danny Young is probably sitting there thinking, what happened to me? Apologies, Danny, it wasn't on my overall list. So, Danny Young, on behalf of the applicant. Same things before, Danny. You got 3 minutes, and it's the right-hand button. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Good. Yeah. Dear councillors and members of the Planning Committee, firstly, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to review our submission and listen to me talk about our application. My name is Danny Young, and I'm the owner of Telescope Property Group, whom is the applicant for Lampett's Hill in Corringham. We embarked on this journey over 2.5 years ago. However, this site has been on the council's radar since 2015 and has been in some of the landowners' ownership for over 25 years. We recognise that 10 years ago there was a lot of opposition against the application. The number of objections has decreased considerably as time has progressed. We note there has been circa 107 public objections, but would like to mention that we also received 900 plus signatures in support of the development from residents across the borough. To the objectors, a majority live close to the site and we met at our community engagement event. I understand and truly apologise for the inconvenience. Please know we have worked with our consultancy team, our case officer, and have been empathetic in regard to design and the proximity to homes, gardens and the development within its entirety. From the outset, we wanted to engage with all key stakeholders so the council may have an input into the formulation of our scheme. We engaged in the PPA and many iterations and amendments of the design and layout following each meeting and input from the council. This planning performance agreement led to the key details of the scheme being implemented, including, but not limited to, parking, density, building height, and retaining and improving the existing landscape. We continue to promote the site through the local plan and achieved an allocation for residential development with Regulation 18 document. Our Lampett's Hill site was included in every iteration of the document, apart from if there were no greenbelt release, which, as you know, is not feasible due to the amount of greenbelt within Thurrock and also the amount of houses that need to be delivered. There have been many twists and turns on our journey: delays in the local plan, the Lower Thames crossing, change in personnel within the council, a change in government, change to the national planning framework, the increased need for housing delivery, and the creation of grave belt. We've had to pivot many times, but have always kept the council abreast of our plans to ensure...
I know you only have 3 months, but we're starting to lose you a bit because it is going very fast. You can afford to slow down very slightly.
A little bit nervous as well, sorry.
Oh, absolutely no problem. But
you'll scare me. I'm doing. Where may I start from again? Sorry.
I think from we continue to promote the site through the local plan.
Yeah.
Carry on, Danny.
Can I continue?
Yep, carry on, please.
We continue to promote the site through the local plan and achieved an allocation for residential development within the Regulation 18 document. Our Lampett's Hill site was included in every iteration of the document, apart from if there were no greenbelt release, which, as you know, is not feasible due to the amount of greenbelt within Thurrock and the amount of houses that need to be delivered. There has been many twists and turns on our journey: delays in the local plan, the Lower Thames crossing, change in personnel within the council, a change in government, change in the national planning framework, the increased needed for housing delivery, and the creation of grey belt. We have had to pivot many times, but have always kept the council abreast of our plans to ensure a cohesive approach for the delivery of our scheme. In addition to the above, we have ticked every box to be confirmed as grey belt, but as also stated within Mr Ward's report, the 50% affordable housing offers a substantial VSE case and will be a massive contribution to housing numbers and the provision of affordable housing units within the borough in a very sustainable location on a very contained site. Since 2015, DP World has become an economic hub of Thurrock and facilitated a substantial increase in the level of available jobs, employment, and therefore the need for housing. Planning policy has also changed over the past decade, particularly recently, where the need for housing delivery is very much a national political topic. The development will be for homes for first-time buyers, downsizers, professionals, couples, and be homes for those employed at the ever-growing port to assist with boosting their local economy. Our ambition is for this extension to be one that contributes to the borough in isolation, but also one that thoughtfully integrates...
Apologies for disturbing you again, Danny. In the interests of fairness, we will have to stop you there. We're well over the 3 minutes.
Oh, are we? Okay.
But bear in mind that with the, as with Anne's statement, the councillors all have a written copy, so we have seen what you've got. So you're not...
Should you let me go faster?
Yeah.
No, you're okay. I'm joking.
Take your point, but when it gets to the point where we couldn't quite understand what you're saying.
Thank you.
Right, so questions for Danny? Okay, I'll lead off. Danny, I would like to know a bit about the petition, how it was put together.
Yeah, essentially, we had 3-4 teams, and we went out, door knocked, stood outside Asda's, and obviously we knew that this site had a history of objections, so we wanted to demonstrate. But you could...
Excuse me, folks, it does not help your cause in any way if you're going to heckle the man while he's speaking. We need to make a decision based on facts, and we will try and get to the bottom of it. Thank you.
So essentially, yeah, we had a few teams that went out, door knocked, sat in front of Asda's and other points across the borough and took signatures.
When you say across the borough, because obviously the further away you get from the actual location...
No, we fully understand that. It wasn't all specifically, the hot point in Coveringham. There was Aveley, Tilbury, different crosses across the borough.
And is there any reason why you went to other locations, given that we are talking about a specific location here?
Honest and transparency, the reason was that obviously if you're local to this site, you are going to raise an objection. And obviously I'm sure that if someone in Tilbury, they would raise an objection to it being in their borough, whereas someone in Coveringham may not.
Okay, on that basis, if you went to Norwich, they'd probably say...
No, but within the borough.
Sorry, folks, please. We do appreciate that you are very concerned that these things are very emotive, but we need to actually be able to get the business done to serve you best.
But essentially, you know, it was to demonstrate that there is housing need within Thurrock, so it is a borough kind of question.
Thank you. Anybody else? Aaron?
Thank you, Danny, for your statement. Could you just outline what consultation you've actually done with local residents, please?
So we did a full community engagement event, so that constituted of a leaflet drop. We used a consultant, and then we had a one-day kind of community engagement event where everyone came in, gave their information, we discussed the scheme with them. Was there anything more to that, James? No? Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Aaron. Steve?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Danny.
Thank you.
I'm just trying to, in my head, in the paragraph on page 5, which I'm not sure if that makes sense to you, but it starts off, we continue to promote the site through the local plan. Yeah. And then further down in that, it says, the site was included in every iteration of the document, so I understand what you're talking about there. If there were no greenbelts released, understand that. Which, as you know, is not feasible due to the amount of greenbelt within Thurrock, and I'm not sure I understand.
Oh, sorry, apologies. So what we were saying in that statement was that obviously Thurrock is a predominantly greenbelt borough, and in order to meet the necessary housing delivery, you would need to release some greenbelt in order to achieve those targets.
Right, I understand what you're saying then in that case. I'm not sure that I completely agree with your view about how much greenbelt there is, given that the Lower Thames crossing is taking a third of it. So, but fine, I understand it, that's great. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Anybody else? Right, well, thank you very much, Danny, and you may resume your seat. Thank you. So now we will return to Alan's report, and this is your opportunity to question him on any aspects of that. So, who would like to start the questions? Russell, and then Aaron.
Chair. We were discussing earlier grey belt, green belt, and the definitions of such. This does appear to be more grey belt within the green belt than the previous application, because it has got quite a few derelict buildings on it. I understand that it's been mentioned 93% of it is actual other land, but we do need to provide housing in Thurrock. So when we're looking at definitions of grey belt, this tends to be what I imagine grey belt to be.
I think possibly we weren't, Alan's looking a bit puzzled because he wanted to know what the question was.
Then the question is, with the national policy framework, this is what grey belt is.
So I think one thing we all need to be very clear about is Greenbelt is a designation and a name. It doesn't require the land is green and undeveloped, but when they historically did the Greenbelt designations, a lot of it was, but some of it wasn't. And in the same vein, grey belt doesn't need to be grey. You know, it doesn't work like that. It's probably actually an unfortunate term, but when we look at the definition of grey belt, and again going back to the national framework, there's two gateways to be grey belt. One is previously developed land, which is what I think you're referring to here. You know, when you expect kind of that dirty land and there's fireworks shop and some hard standing and those kind of things. That's one gateway route to being grey belt. But the other one, it could be undeveloped, and then it's the more nuanced view with regards to how do we deal with that? Why do we think it's grey belt? And again that it talks about urban sprawl, towns merging, effect on historic towns. The third one we're ignoring because we don't have any in the borough. And that's the judgment call. And Councillor Sisterton earlier was referring to the planning policy guidance, which gives us that meat on the bone for the framework. And when it talks about sprawl, it does say it could be free of existing development and lack physical feature. But the thing is, there's two parts to it. Free of existing development, one tick. but then there's an and the and is, does it lack physical features within reasonable proximity which could restrict and contain the development? So you could be undeveloped, but you need to have those natural barriers to contain the development from the wider greenbelt. And that's the more nuanced thing which we've looked at tonight in terms of trying to figure out how we deal with that. But I think we should all be very clear, the land can be undeveloped, but we need to say, where could we say no to any more development? And that's the case here in Corringham. We've got defensible boundaries, we've got the railway line to the north. You can't say we're going to merge with Fobbing because Fobbing's not a town, so it's about a town and a town merging. And when you look further to the east, there's such a distance and there's so much greenbelt in between, then you haven't got that merging, that coalescence. And that's the way we need to think about it when we're saying, is it grey belt? And I appreciate it's a view, but it's a professional view, and it's one where I take on board appeal decisions, case law, big public inquiry in the summer with regards to spending hours and weeks actually debating this. And that's the view tonight, that you're squaring off this part of Corringham. You're squaring it off. It's that jigsaw puzzle piece which is helping to square that off, rather than, as it says in the planning policy guidance, it's not an extended finger of development into the greenbelt. You know, it's not an isolated finger, it's squaring off, and that's the difference that we've got here. That's why we're saying it's grey belt.
Thanks, Alan. Ross, are you happy with that? Steve?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Alan.
Sorry, Steve, I must have... Right, I was supposed to have brought Aaron in first, but you go.
At risk of being too polite to each other here. Two things you said that I just wanted to pick up on. You keep saying that the railway line's to the north. The railway line is some way further north. The boundary of this is Southend Road, isn't it?
The boundary of the application site is, but I'm saying, what would I, as a reasonable professional, consider to be that defensible boundary? And actually, I would go as far as that railway line. We've got a current application to the north, which does need to be considered on its own merits. But it's not the case you can just say this road is your defensible boundary. It could be the defensible boundary, and we could take that view. But actually, I'm looking in the wider realm here with regards to what I consider to be the definitive limit where we would allow any development. And it's a very new thing, but like I say, having had the benefit of that public inquiry in the summer and looking at other appeal decisions, my view is that's where you've got that containment.
Okay, thank you. But one of the things that we've all hopefully been drummed into over the years is that we're actually talking about what's within the red line, and the boundary of the red line is the road. Yeah? Would you agree with that?
Yes, but I'm saying that doesn't necessarily form the boundary to where we consider the grey belt would finish.
Now I understand. Okay, fine, thank you. One of the other things you brought up, you said that in the past 12 months, or I believe that was what you said, there were only 9 affordable homes provided.
No, I was saying that in the year 22 to 23, only 9 affordable homes were built.
Okay, so that leads me to the next question. Do we know, and it's not really a question for you, it's probably more of a question for Ash, do we know of the planning permission that's been granted that's never moved forwards, how much of, roughly what the number of affordable houses are where we've actually given planning permission but nothing's happened, i.e. nothing's been done? Do we not know that? No?
So we'll have in the 5-year land supply the information around permissions and pipeline. In terms of the sort of specific figure, I don't have it to hand, but we can certainly provide that, absolutely. But I mean, in terms of your decision making tonight, I don't think that would be a material point that you would need to consider anyway.
No, I completely agree with you. It's just that since Alan brought it up, it's played in my mind, and hence, so if the opportunity's there without anybody doing a big stack of work for no good reason, it would be good to know, because we historically have a problem with where we've granted planning permission and then nothing's happened with the site. And if that's having an impact on affordable housing, then we kind of need to encourage people, perhaps. But that's all. Thanks, Ash. Thanks, Alan.
Thanks, Steve. Aaron?
Thank you. So we're speaking a lot about the green belt at the moment. Likely we're going to be doing this moving forward. But within the, talking again about the green belt, we've, in one of the statements made, we've got, they're saying that there's oak, hawthorn trees. Is that correct compared to what we've got? And if so, are we going to be saving them?
Yes, the council's ecologist has examined the tree protection plan. He's examined what's being retained and what's being removed. Everything that is being removed is being kept to an absolute minimum, and then it's controlled by condition. But of the trees which are being removed and the hedging which is being removed, there's no concern with regards to the fact, any view that they should be protected or anything along those lines. So what's on site and what's being removed and what's being retained has been considered acceptable by the relevant consultee.
So what's being removed, are they being replaced?
Yes, and apologies because it was just a clarification at the beginning of the presentation, but the council's ecologist has asked for a very robust landscaping plan. So we have one that's recommended on the committee report as it is, but I've been asked to enhance that, which would, if permission was to be granted, we would be looking to add that as another condition.
Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron. Anybody else? Kathy.
Thank you. I just wanted that the previous application, they'd obviously had a good discussion with their portfolio holder and had got the affordable housing rent level down to 70% of the market rent. I wonder if you've had any similar conversation with these.
No, we haven't had that conversation. As the report states, they have dropped the number of homes by 20 on the site, and the new framework is such that 50% affordable housing is uncharted territory. It's something which I don't believe has been delivered locally, and we have to be realistic. As Mr. Taylor was saying, we have to make sure these sites are, well, not make sure, we have to seek to facilitate their delivery. And the housing mix isn't quite what's in our policy, but our policy is very out of date. But the applicants have been upfront in that regard, saying that that's what they need to make this site happen in order to be able to sell this site and actually bring housing forward. So it's not reduced. The affordable rent is up to 80%, and they will need to get into contract with a housing provider. But again, even the housing providers also need to make sure they have a viable business model. So if we start restricting it, then we might end up with non-delivery. So I appreciate what's being said, but it is up to 80%, and we haven't sought to change that.
Thanks, Kathy. Alan, I'd like to talk drainage, if I may. Anne, in her statement, pointed out the potential flood risk, not only on the site, but to houses around it. On page 85, if I'm reading this right, point 7 at the foot of the page, Anglian Water, detailed drainage. And it says here, the developer should note that the site drainage details submitted have not been approved for the purposes of adoption. Could you put some flesh on the bones of that, please, for me?
So Anglian Water are a consultee, but in this situation, the primary consultee is our own lead local flood authority. They are the lead authority with regards to the point of flooding. It's not unusual for Anglian Water to point things out like this, because ultimately the applicant might seek to connect into their network. And then there's a separate process whereby they have to get Anglian Water's agreement to connect into that network. And if Anglian Water aren't happy, then they can't connect, and they might have a development which they can't necessarily implement. So it's a separate regime to planning, and it's a separate regime with regards to the drainage strategy, because we, as the local lead authority, on flooding, we need to be satisfied, and our relevant officers are satisfied. They put robust conditions on this, requiring full details when the final details of the application, the reserved matters, come in, and that will be the point at which we can ensure that what's there is acceptable. But at this point in time, as an outline application, they're satisfied with the information that you will be able to have an acceptable drainage strategy implemented, and you will not increase flood risk elsewhere.
So we're agreed that there is a flood risk, that the land carries with it a flood risk. Are we agreed on that?
Any land over a certain size area has to have a flood risk assessment, and there is always a risk, and it's the level of risk. So there's some surface water flooding on this site, which isn't unusual on a field. You see ponding, if you've got clay underneath it. It's really about how you deal with it. So in this instance, and with all our applications going forward, because climate change was mentioned, they have to design in 40% increase because of climate change. So it's a hugely over-designed, at this point in time, drainage system, which will then become appropriate if we do get the climate change that we could potentially have.
So there is a risk. The plan that's being recommended is designed to meet that risk and possibly further risks down the line. Is that what you're saying?
And up to 40% on top of the current risk, yes.
Thanks for that, Alan. Jackie.
Thanks, Chair. Sorry, Alan, I'm going to go back to the green-grey thing again. Just so that I'm clear in my mind, you said, didn't you, that if you've got green belt and then there's some part of that land within the green belt is deemed grey belt because somebody's, I don't know, put the firework van there or a burger van, whatever, so that then makes it grey belt and other reasons as well, obviously. So does that mean that that green belt that's now grey belt makes the green belt outside the grey belt that was green belt grey?
I think I'll start with the burger van analogy. When the grey belt came in, when the government did the consultation on it, they were very concerned about people suddenly changing land to then become grey belt, like laying down some hard standing and then go, look at this, it's now grey belt. So it has to be lawful. That's a very important point. So people can't do things like park a load of containers and then deem it to be grey belt. It has to have a lawful permission in place. So that's to stop people doing things like that. But on the second part, I would ask that you just ask me that question again, please.
So what I mean is, if the grey belt within what was the green belt, this bit here is green, then we define a bit in the middle that's grey. Does that make the green outside more susceptible to then become grey later on?
That's a very good question. And that's something that is the fear. It's the domino effect. And again, harking back to the site we had in the summer, which was in the middle of the green belt, it was deemed to be grey belt because it wasn't offending the purposes of the green belt, but it undermined the purposes of the green belt as a whole. So what you're saying there is that's a test as to whether or not it's appropriate grey belt development, because if we say yes to this and you get a domino effect and there's no defensible boundary, there's no railway line, nothing, then you are undermining the purposes of the green belt as a whole, and then it's not appropriate grey belt development. So that's the check to stop what you're saying there. But you're right, and that's why I didn't use the road as my analysis saying this is where the grey belt ends, because we have to be realistic. You're right, what's to stop someone doing it on the other side of the road? And I'm saying you've got the railway, you've got fobbing. Beyond fobbing, you've got flooding. The flooding is strong enough to say no to grey belt development. And that's why we have to take that bigger picture view and just be upfront with regards to where we think we could reasonably say no.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. Thanks, Jackie. Any further questions? Steve.
Sorry, just one, and it's probably not Alan, it's probably more for Matt or Julian, I'm guessing. I sort of read what you've put about highways, so obviously there was some concern about that single access point. Is that a reasonable? Any one of you, I don't mind.
Sorry, what's the concern about the single
I'm
access?
just asking the question because a single access point seems relatively constrained for the volume of properties that are being proposed, because it means everything's got to come in and out of exactly the same junction and onto a road that's, and it does mention in here the issue around speeding on Lampett's Hill and some of the other issues. So I just wanted to check that. I know it says it here that they weren't happy, and I just want to be convinced that everybody's kind of on board with that.
Thank you, Chair. It's not uncommon to have a single point of access for developments of this size. There are notable locations such as Avery Bypass, where there was 365 located off of a single point of access. Similarly in Barterfields in East Tilbury, where it was 299, so it's kind of in that range of it being acceptable. What I would point out is that their junction arrangement is a priority junction, but it's got a ghosted right turn lane, so vehicles waiting to turn right would not affect the free flow of the southbound traffic. So in terms of their assessment, we've determined that it's not severe impact on the network.
That's fine. I understand now. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Steve. Kathy?
Just a quick question. You mentioned DP World just being not very far away, obviously, and I think it is a short drive, but as far as I can make out, there's no public transport access between this site and DP World. Can that be addressed in any way through 106 or anything like that? Thank you.
I think it's a really good point, and it would make sense. It would make sense for them to, because they are a very, in terms of the shuttle buses and those kind of things, the applicant hasn't offered it, and we have to consider whether or not it is necessary. And I don't think it is necessary to recommend permission, but at the same time, it is very close. You could potentially take sustainable means of transport, but ultimately, if we permit housing very close to it, it's encouraging a more sustainable form of travel than coming from much further away, because it's not the most sustainable employment hub as it is, really. So you can lead a horse to water kind of analogy in terms of getting more housing in that area. Employment needs are there from them, so it makes sense to try and put the housing close to it.
I understand what you're saying. So it's more sustainable just to be driving 6 minutes than half an hour. Yes, okay. And then one other question is that this is obviously outline. Would detail plans, when they do come forward, can they come back to committee? Can we ask for that?
Yes, absolutely.
Thanks, Alan. Thanks, Kathy. Any further questions? Right, so let's move on to the debate. Who would like to start us off? Okay, a couple of points maybe to get you thinking about it. Similar situation to the previous one, in that fundamental to this is whether we feel that the argument classifying this as grey belt stands up. Alan's explained that it's partly down to a small part of the site being previously developed, but partly down to the undeveloped part of the land not adequately meeting purposes A, B, and D of Greenbelt. So there are effectively two reasons why different parts of it are being classified as grey belt. It's our job to decide whether we feel that those are coherent and convincing reasons. Apart from that, we need to be satisfied that things such as infrastructure, and in this case in particular, the risk of flooding, both inside and around the edges of the development, have been adequately addressed. And I think those, for me, are the things that seem to have come out of the question so far. So the question really is, yes, I think we all feel a slight pain every time we see any piece of greenbelt getting lost to development. But the thing here is, do we feel the arguments are strong enough? And if not, why not? So I'll give you that as a starter. Who would like to talk about it? Thank you, Russell.
Yeah, as I said earlier, this looks more like what grey belt should be, because it's something that's there already, and something needs to be done with what is the fireworks factory, because I imagine it's a bit of an eyesore, and the attached land to it is green belt, but as it's been explained, it's the corner that needs filling in. So if we're going to look at building on green belt, if it's attached or associated with grey belt and it's such a location, it needs must, then perhaps it would be a better site than the previous one.
Thanks, Russell. Anybody else? Kathy.
I think the sort of main argument we had for the previous one was the lack of boundaries, and this has got boundaries, and the road provides a boundary. I'd be a bit reluctant to I know you're wanting to include all the rest of it for future development, but at this stage, I think we even if we just look at what's in front of us, there are the roads do provide that. So I think our defence is weaker, of the green belt on this side, from my point of view. Thank you.
Steve.
Thanks, Chair. I guess it comes as no surprise because I'm always going to try and defend the greenbelt, but I accept it, as Councillor Sisterson saying, I follow the thinking. I guess the big concern I would have with it is that boundary, and squaring off a corner is one thing, but then would the next step not be across the road or possibly north, which you've already said there's potentially an application for, which is why I was kind of trying to define where the boundary is, whether it's the road or the railway line. And it appears to be the railway line from, I think, what you've said. Yes?
Alan, do you want to come back to that?
Yes, that's how the report refers to it, the railway line.
Yeah, and that's why I was asking the question, because that almost leads by default that, okay, well, we will then go that way, and then we'll go that way, and then we'll go wherever else. And that's the bit that really bothers me. I mean, I'm not happy about development in the Greenbelt under any circumstance, with the fact that what we're doing by definition here is defining something further north worries me. So that's one of my big concerns, probably the biggest one as I look at this. The point that Jackie was making as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Anybody else? Okay. I'm really sorry. I'm afraid I can't. I'd love to, but it's not in our power to involve members of the public, apart from your representative. Thank you. Appreciate your comment. So, I mean, we haven't really talked about infrastructure, have we, or have we? I mean, it's been mentioned that the centre of Corringham is within easy access or distance. Any concerns arise when you read through the report in terms of Shrikant?
As per the page number 95, urban design is clearly mentioned that they are not supporting because of the street network height and density appears insensitive. So I think council need to think about that one, the providing proper infrastructure for street network, or need to think about should not be over density, is not over development. So it is my concern. Thank you.
Next year, you're referring to the urban design contribution.
Not supporting.
Yes, from urban design's point of view, they had issues around the density. Yeah, it'd be useful. Alan, do you have something to say on that?
Yeah, sure. So the density of this site, I said in the presentation,